This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Boosted by the defection of Nadine Dorries. You really? Do you think there's anybody anywhere who goes, oh, hello, Nadine Dorries has joined them? Maybe I should start taking them a little bit more seriously. We may if there's time, because in some ways we've missed the hilarity that Ms. Dorries provides. And of course it is Ms. or possibly Mrs. And not Lady, which is, I suspect, the reason why she's defected to the Reform Party, because she thinks it might enhance her chances of getting that gong that she was so cruelly denied by Boris Johnson or whoever it was. And, you know, speaking of Boris Johnson, as we did a moment ago, and I appreciate that it's not a very nice thing to do, and that it can be quite traumatic, even perhaps triggering, to remember just how unhinged our country has become as a consequence, among other things, of treating him seriously. But I've got a quote from a politician, oddly, about Nadine Dorries defending Boris Johnson. I will share it with you shortly and see if you can guess who it was that said it. But we have to chuckle. We have to begin with a chuckle. Boosted by the defection of Nadine Dorries. Phrases that you never thought you'd hear. That's two this week. When did Britain become North Korea? On the front page at the Daily Mail, and then parroted, of course, in Washington by Mr. Farage. And then the second one was boosted by the defection. Conservatives, I mean, what's left of them, they don't sound very upset about it, do they? We wish her well. She's your problem now. It's extraordinary. But we digress. And we will actually go back to the greatest hits. I'll put that up as a promise. Some of them include me, would you believe? Little old me. Your humble correspondent, a lowly radio presenter, living rent-free in the mind of the Secretary of State for Culture and Media. It was an extraordinary episode in my so-called career. Worthy, perhaps. I mean, perhaps the funniest was when she called me, what was it, a public school posh boy, and then a word I can't say on the radio without incurring the wrath of Ofcom. Begins with F, ends with wit. And I'm looking at this thinking, what on earth is she so upset about, this strange woman? And someone sent me a message saying, have you seen that Nadine Dorries has had a go? I said, yeah, I did. And he said, do you know that her daughters went to the same school that we did? It was off an old school friend of mine. And I said, don't be ridiculous. Surely I'd have known that by now. I'd have read about it in the alumni magazine or something like that. And B, if she had sent her daughters to the same school that I went to, she couldn't be insulting me on the grounds of the school that I went to, because that would display an IQ that was struggling to get into single figures, never mind double or triple. But lo and behold, Google is your friend, and she had indeed insulted me for going to the same school that she sent her own daughters to, which was almost as ridiculous as that time she accused the BBC of employing, being full of people who employed their own children, something that is not statistically supported by the fact, but which is rather challenged by the knowledge that she employs her own children, the ones that went to my school. I mean, hypocrisy feels like too small. Anyway, at least we can all agree she's finally found her spiritual and political home. But we may refresh our memories shortly about what a wonderful gift she was to, well, what, satire? I don't know. And we may also, I should have possibly, we've kind of got ChatGPT on the case, would you believe? Look at some of the headlines from one newspaper which today has gone completely bonkers. I give you a clue. It's the same newspaper that began the week asking when we had turned into North Korea. A newspaper that has largely cheer-led for almost everything awful that's happened to this country since, I'd probably say since 2015, but you can go back much further if you want. And if you assemble some of the front pages that show them celebrating all the stuff that has brought the country to the mess that it's currently in, and that Keir Starmer is charged with fixing, you'd see an extraordinary saga that speaks to something bigger, some sort of almost some mass delusional event that's unfolding on the right of British politics at the moment, that everything they've done has no bearing whatsoever upon where we are. You know, I usually hit you with the list at this point, don't I? Austerity, Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, all of these things cheered to the rafters by many broadcasters, let alone politicians, but most obviously by right-wing newspapers and most obviously by the Daily Mail. All of them cheered to the rafters. You won't believe me when I tell you the front pages that they published when Liz Truss Truss set fire to the British economy. Absolutely extraordinary. Or indeed when Theresa May called an election that saw her majority get absolutely mullered. You won't believe me when I show you the front pages that the Daily Mail celebrated all of these events with. And now, just over a year into a Labour government, while all of the consequences of the catastrophes they helped inflict upon the nation continue to nibble away at our security and our general happiness, they're trying to somehow disown all of the things that are responsible for the messes that the country faces. I suspect all of the problems that the United Kingdom currently faces are a consequence of the Labour government putting VAT on school fees. That seems to be pretty much the extent of what passes for political journalism in one corner of Fleet Street this morning. Now, I need to confide in you. Sometimes when I find myself going off on an unexpected tangent at 3 minutes after 10 in the morning, it can be a little bit difficult then to get the phone in up and running on a subject that is not directly related to what we've just talked about. It is a cross that is borne more by my colleagues than by me, because as you may have detected over the years, I quite happily talk through till 1 o'clock without letting you interrupt me at all. But it's frowned upon. It's frowned upon. It is not to be encouraged. And also, I do love listening to you, talking to you, interrupting you, more than perhaps is healthy. And that's what I've just done again. So as the time ticks around to 10 past 10, I now launch the phone in. But I want you to ignore tradition. I want you to buck the trend. I want you to laugh in the face of how things normally unfold and call me early and call me often on this vexed question of the Deputy Prime Minister. Let me express a syllable or three of sympathy for people who wish that we weren't talking about it again. We've tried to work it out. Has anyone kept count, Keith? Has anyone kept count of how many phone-ins, how many hours of phone-in LBC has now dedicated to Angela Rayner? And I understand why you may be... I hope you're not bored by it, because it's my job to make sure you're not bored, even if the subject matter is similar to stuff that's gone before. But it's a mistake on your part to think that we shouldn't be talking about it. There is a very real chance that the Deputy Prime Minister will walk the plank today, and... if you're not talking about that on a current affairs radio programme, then I'm afraid you are missing, not just missing a trick, you're frankly missing several tricks. You're playing an absolute whatever the opposite of a blinder is. So of course we must talk about it, and of course there is a difficulty in discussing it in depth when we are still waiting for the findings of the independent ethics advisor, and yet, our job together today is to find ways into it that keep the interest levels high and which possibly shed light upon the subject. Do you know what my favourite call yesterday was? I don't want to offend anybody who rang in yesterday and is not my favourite caller. My favourite caller yesterday was actually the conveyancer. There's a tiny little bit of me that's tempted today to invite you to tell me about all of your conveyancing nightmares. But I suspect that might be a little bit of a distraction from the central point. The central point is having a howler. Thank you, Juno. Having a howler as the opposite of playing a blinder. I think the central point here is what is going to happen and why. I do want to tempt a few more professionals onto the programme. Of course, if you are a professional and you ring this programme, that would make one of us. I do want to tempt a few more professionals onto this programme to talk me through what you think might have happened. Because what we have now is the conveyancing company in Hove essentially saying that they didn't give any advice whatsoever regarding trusts. I don't want to overread what is going on here, or they didn't give any advice whatsoever involving tax. It seems to me possible, or they've simply said that they did not advise her that she was eligible for a lower rate of stamp duty. They simply used the online tool that is available to everybody at the HMRC website and used it to punch in the information that she had given them, and the figure that came out at the end would be based upon the house in Hove being her primary home, which of course she's subsequently accepted, having taken further advice. It was not. Here's a game for you. There is a politician who claimed he'd bought a house in his constituency And then it turned out actually he hadn't. The house had been bought by their partner, which meant that because they already owned several properties, they wouldn't be paying any stamp duty at all. Do you want to have a guess at which politician it was who told the media he'd bought a house in his constituency when he hadn't? He had actually put said house in his partner's name, or perhaps his partner bought it outright. I don't know. The point is, it means that no stamp duty was due, or no second home stamp duty was due, and that would, I guess, get filed under deliberately managing to avoid stamp duty as opposed to accidentally managing to avoid stamp duty like Angela Rayner is claiming to have done. So whether you're a professional or not, and you can be as negative and as unkind as you like, please. I mean, I don't want you to necessarily indulge long-nursed hatreds and prejudices, but if I ask you what you think happened, and we probably will give a prize on Monday to whoever gets closest. When we get the report from the independent ethics advisor, whoever gets closest today to describing what actually happened could possibly win a prize. Don't ask me what the prize is. That's above my pay grade. I'll warn you in advance, it won't be very impressive or very exciting, but it will be yours if you get closest to predicting what you think happened. And it may be that you're more likely to get close to it if you do actually work in tax affairs or conveyancing or the law in that area. But what do you think happened? What do you think is going to be in the independent ethics advisor's report? Again, I can't believe this is necessary, but if anyone is truly struggling to understand the importance of the role of the independent ethics advisor, it forbids prime ministers from acting according to their own whim and whimsy. So if you haven't got an independent ethics advisor, the prime minister can stand up and say, well, I've looked into it and there's absolutely no case to answer. And we would all sit there thinking, unless we were forelock-tugging crones, we'd all sit there thinking, well, I'm not sure that the prime minister was the right person. It's a bit like Boris Johnson conducting an investigation into that time when Priti Patel was accused of bullying. Imagine if he'd conducted it himself instead of the independent ethics advisor conducting it and concluding that she had, at which point Boris Johnson completely ignored the independent ethics advisor. Was that the reason why the first one resigned? It's so hard to keep up. But if anyone is truly confused about why they are good things, it means that prime ministers can't act like tyrants. Prime ministers can't act like Trumps. Prime ministers can't act without accountability or transparency. They can't conduct their own investigation. The best way to understand it, and I don't know that anyone is daft enough to really need this explanation, it means that prime ministers can't mark their own homework or the homework of their colleagues. You bring in an independent headmaster to have a look at the homework. And today, that independent headmaster will report on what Angela Rayner has done. You have heard so much coverage of this that, frankly, you can go straight to the back of the class if you haven't got a clear idea of what it is that actually happened. I'll see you there, by the way, at the back of the class, because I don't have the full grasp of trust law. But what do you think actually happened? What do you think actually happened? And, I mean, within the laws of libel, of course, you don't have to be offering up a generous analysis of what has unfolded. You know, whether corners have been cut or whether questions that should have been asked were not asked, whether or not the failure to disclose information sometimes can be a sin of omission. What do you think happened? And, of course, the more... I don't know. Is this true? Do you think the more expertise you have, the more interesting your insights will be? Not necessarily. I don't want to sound like Michael Gove. I have categorically not have enough of experts. And on some subjects, I need them more than I do on others. But I've got two things. One is a bit childish. The first one is the grown-up question, and that is this. What do you think happened? A bit childish to offer a prize to the person who gets closest, but we'll have a look. 0345 6060973. And then the second one is, and this might actually fit into the same category, have you got something interesting to say about this story that hasn't been said 74 times already? If you've got something interesting to say about this story that hasn't been said 74 times already, I really want to hear it. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. So what do you think happened? Stroke, what do you think is going to be in the ethics advisor's findings later today, probably after I finish, sadly. They always do that, don't they? It's as if it's deliberate. And secondly, Is there anything left to say beyond the prediction of what the ethics advisor will say? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 60 60973. And after the break, I'll share the identity. It's going to shock you because squeaky clean, absolute paragon of virtue type character who bought a house in their constituency, or claimed they bought a house in their constituency, but it turned out it was in their partner's name, which means, of course, that there'll be no second home stamp duty to be paid whatsoever. I bet you can't guess who that was.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 10 is the time. I had the misfortune of watching and listening to Nadine Dorries this morning. If she is the Prime Minister's defence, then he really is a goner. Who do you think was responsible for offering up that rather unflattering analysis of a woman who has just boosted Reform UK by defecting to them? Shall I do you want to do a multiple choice on this one, or should we just leave it? Should we leave it one? Was it A, Mr. Blobby? Was it B, who's the best? Andrew Marr? Or was it C, Nigel Farage, the leader of the party to which Nadine Dorries has now just defected? So who said in only 2025, I think, who said, I had the misfortune of watching... No, it was longer ago than that. It was in 2022. I had the misfortune of watching and listening to Nadine Dorries this morning. If she is the Prime Minister's defence, then he really is a goner. Was it A, Mr. Blobby? Was it B, Andrew Marr? Or was it C, the man who's just welcomed her defection to his political party? And, of course, the other question currently hanging in the balance is who claimed to have bought a house in their constituency earlier this year, only for it to emerge that it was all in the name of their partner, which meant that they could avoid second home, which probably meant that they could avoid second home stamp duty. Blobby, blobby, blobby. 21 minutes after 10. Angela Rayner is still on the hook. What do you think happened? And, of course, contingent upon that question is the idea of what the ethics advisor is likely to find later today. And then we can possibly nudge it into the area of, well, if that is what happened, is her position tenable or untenable? Richard's in Manchester. Richard, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. How are you?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
Well, I think I possibly have an explanation as to what has occurred.
Hang on, I've just had a thought, mate. Don't make it too good, otherwise the rest of the phone-in might be completely scuppered.
Okay, do you want to ring me back later?
Well, you think it's that good? You're going to shut it? You sound like me now, you're so cocky. You're going to shut the whole thing down at 22 minutes after 10. All right, bring it on. Let's see what you've got.
I'm just hoping that my colleague Andrew, who listens to your show every day whilst at work, is listening to this, because I'm on holiday today. So, hello, Andrew.
Hello, Andrew. Carry on,
yeah.
Richard.
So I think what's happened here is there's been an endeavour to remove money from the trust to provide a deposit for a future purchase. That seems to be what has gone on in terms of the mechanics of it. As I understand it, when you are a trustee, you are effectively still an owner if the person who benefits from the trust is under 18. And my understanding is that the child in question is under 18. So where that leaves you is that knowingly or unknowingly, you still own a property, you go on to buy another one, and effectively you should have to pay second home stamp duty because you are still an owner. And in essence, that's it.
Could she conceivably not have realised she was technically the owner of the first house? Because she no longer had any capital in it. She no longer had any equity in it.
I'm sure that's the case. Well, when I say I'm sure that's the case, I'm not saying that I'm confident in the case of this particular individual. What I'm saying is
that could happen.
I'm saying that because it's a complex area, that may well be the issue.
There are three options, aren't there? She received inaccurate or inadequate advice. She received good advice but ignored it, or she didn't provide enough information to get the advice that she needed, and that you could fit in one and three of that, couldn't you? Because the advice she received might have been inaccurate and inadequate, but only because the person she received it from wasn't aware of the situation you've just described.
Well, I think the issue is that the people who were advising at each end of the transaction are not the same people, are they? The people who advised on the trust presumably were local to her, somewhere near Ashton-under-Lyne or whatever.
Yes.
The conveyancing company was based in Kent, and my guess is that the conveyancing company in Kent would have asked the question
it's in Hove, I think. It's in Hove. East Sussex.
That's where the property is, but the conveyances are in Kent, I believe.
No, it's in Hove. I mean, I'm not going to get stuck up on this, but it is. I'm just reading it here. They're in Hove. But anyway, carry on.
Okay. All right. Well, wherever they are, they have an obligation to the Inland Revenue to obviously make sure that the correct amount of stamp duty is paid, because it is them who pay it rather than the client directly. My guess is there will have been a question along the lines of, do you have an interest in any other property?
Yeah.
And the answer would have been given no.
Yeah.
And that may have been given wittingly or unwittingly. But the answer would be no, on which basis they then go into the HMRC stamp duty calculator, work out what's owed, tell her that's what she has to pay, and that's what she pays. So I suspect that's how it's happened.
And if that is how it's happened, it would be perfectly reasonable for people listening to this programme to answer yes and no to not the same person, two different people. Does that make her position untenable? I could see someone saying, yes, of course it does, because she's the housing minister and she should not have got herself into this mess. Or I could equally understand somebody saying, no, of course she shouldn't go because it was an honest and rather easy mistake to make. What's your answer to that question? If you're right, would that make it untenable?
I think the problem in anything like this is that ultimately the question you've got to ask is, if you're not sure that you're on safe ground, would you want to dig a bit deeper? And I think if you're in a position which is so inextricably linked to this particular situation, I don't think there's anywhere to go on that one. Surely there are enough people around her who can advise her as to how stamp duty actually works.
So we're back to the... it's all very well saying that I would have done the same thing, but I'm not a housing minister, and therefore I would have asked at every turn, can this come back and bite me on the backside?
Yeah. My partner is a mortgage advisor, and she frequently deals with situations where people are buying second properties, and questions are asked along the lines of, if I can keep this house in my name and put this house in my wife's name, or vice versa, or, whatever, does that work? And the fundamental tenet is there a financial link with that property? And clearly, in 99.9% of cases that she's advising on, there are. But in this one, there isn't. She is obligated, by the way, to tell her clients that she's not a tax expert and that they should seek independent advice.
So actually, it's going to be, I mean, if you like this sort of thing, Laurie Magnus's report is actually going to be quite interesting. Potentially, because of all these known unknowns and indeed unknown unknowns. Before you go, I was wrong and you were right about I think you knew that, but you were too polite to labour the point, weren't you? The firm is indeed in Kent.
Sometimes, James, it's not all about the win, is it?
Sometimes it's best to be right and silent, Richard.
Yeah.
Maybe not on this occasion. If it had been the other way around, I probably would have been a little bit less gracious than you. So thank you for that. But mea culpa. It is indeed in Kent, the law firm that she used to conduct. And you could tell, but there was something quite, I don't know what the correct word is, something quite dignified about how Richard dealt with it. Classy. Thank you, Keith. Just classy. He goes, yeah, the fella's wrong. I'm the caller. He's the presenter. But he's the one that's dropped a clanger. I'm just going to let it go. Life's too short to humiliate him. He'll realise eventually. And I'm sure he'll make good on his own mistake. And here I am, making good on my own mistake. Thank you, Richard. Rob's in St Albans. Rob, what would you like to say?
Hi there. I'm going to be super quick. I've got a very extensive property background, but what I'll just say is solicitors and conveyancers don't offer advice on stamp duty unless you specifically seek it out from them. They ask you to fill out a stamp duty declaration online or in their normal paperwork, and they charge you the stamp duty accordingly. Equally, if you go to a tax advisor, from my experience, 90% of the time, they'll say, go and speak to your conveyancer. We don't get involved in stamp duty. Go and speak to your solicitor. So obviously this firm said we didn't offer any advice on stamp duty. They've just done their job according to the form she filled out. I doubt very much she spoke to a tax advisor. I reckon if she spoke to anyone, it was one of those people who's a friend of a friend of a family. Oh, I know about taxes, and probably given advice. Because from my experience, almost on every occasion I've come across someone who's fallen foul, not paid the right stamp duty. They didn't speak to their solicitor. They spoke to someone other than someone who should have been offering the correct advice, and they made a mistake accordingly. Or they did it deliberately, thinking they'd get away with it. Now, I'm not saying she's done either of those things, but they're the most plausible outcomes in my view.
Well, I mean, then she's got a problem because she claims she spoke to 2 tax advisors. Who, if you needed advice on stamp duty, specifically on stamp duty, who would you talk to?
Absolutely the solicitor. They're the one that's going to be invoicing you for it and paying it on your behalf.
Just to be clear, because
I would speak to about stamp duty.
You are distinguishing between a solicitor and a conveyancer.
Well, both. The conveyancer's job is the same thing. They have to get a license to do conveyancing. Part of their process is.
Well, I thought you began. Forgive me. I thought you began by saying they would never give you advice on stamp duty.
No, they do, but you have to ask them.
Oh, I see what you mean. You mean unprompted.
Yeah, their standard process is, here's the form, you fill it out, you're the one liable stamp duty. They don't take any responsibility.
This is going to be it.
Absolves them from any mistakes because you are the one who's self-certified and filled out the form. If you make a mistake on it, that's not their fault.
Yeah.
So that protects them. If you ask them for advice, that's when they have a liability because they've now given you formal advice about it.
So if she didn't tell them about the house in trust in Manchester, it's all on her.
Absolutely,
She can't claim 100%. That she was given bad advice.
Yeah, they've already said we didn't offer advice, which is normal. Solicitors don't ask for advice.
I'm thinking about the tax advisors now. Everything, wherever the buck stops, if they weren't aware of the house being held in trust despite her having no equity in it, they couldn't have given her the advice that she needed.
Yeah, well, if she's got something in writing, if I was in her position, I would sue them and I would name and shame them because they potentially have destroyed her career, haven't they?
Well, if she's got it, then they haven't. I mean, this is a wonderful chicken and egg situation because if she's got the smoking gun that you described, then I would probably expect her to still be in post at Christmas. If she hasn't, I don't know. Politically, I think it's unlikely that she'll go, simply for the reason that the facts would more or less be known to her and to Keir Starmer, and there's a certain confidence in the way that the story has unfolded that the ethics advisor will find in their favour. Unfortunately, that won't have any effect whatsoever upon the hysterical screeching for her blood, but if it isn't the case that she could easily have avoided the mess that she's found herself in, then I think the appetite to keep her in post for political reasons will probably win the day. But then, of course, you've got the problem of what Magnus actually finds. I think, and I said this yesterday, I think it's all going to come down to who knew about the house in trust and how culpable Magnus thinks she is if she didn't tell the relevant people about the house in trust because she didn't think it mattered because she doesn't have any equity in it, how culpable she then becomes for the wrong advice that she received. It's a weird one, that. How you get some bad advice, how can it be your fault? Answer, because you didn't give the person giving the advice all the information they needed to give you the right advice. I like this. What do you think happened? 0345 6060 973. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:35. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Have I revealed any of my riddles yet? Have I done the multiple choice, Mr. Blobby, Andrew Marr? Who was it that said this? I had the misfortune of watching and listening to Nadine Dorries this morning. If she is the PM's defence, then he really is a goner. That was in February of 2022, and it was Mr. Blobby talking about Nadine. No, it was Nigel Farage, of course, talking about the person who today he will be pretending constitutes an amazing coup by tempting her over to his political party. So the question that's still on the board is which well-known political figure claimed to have bought a house in their own constituency, but actually it later turned out to be in their partner's name, which would, I think, technically mean that there would be no requirement to pay the second home stamp duty that Angela Rayner is in such hot water for also not paying, albeit she would say accidentally as opposed to very, very deliberately. 10:36 is the time. And another correction, not of me this time, but of old Richard in Manchester. Nice, classy Richard, who didn't labour the point that he was right about the location of the law firm that had advised Angela Rayner on the purchase of her home in Hove. And he was correct to say it was in Kent, and I was completely wrong to say that it was actually in Hove. So he also made a mistake in that she's not a trustee of the trust, but that doesn't actually affect ownership, even though she doesn't have any equity. So the more complicated it gets, I think a truly objective and honest person generates more sympathy for the situation that Angela Rayner has come into. But how complicated would it have to be for you to then say, well, then it doesn't matter that she's actually housing minister, because in many ways she presides over the system whose complexities have caused her such difficulties. And if you're in charge of the system, not understanding it is a really tricky defence, isn't it? I mean, let's not be silly about this. Defence secretaries don't go to war, generally speaking, and chancellors of the Exchequer rarely go on to run the Bank of England. I think George Osborne went on to run the British Museum. So the idea that you need specific area-based expertise is a misunderstanding of how politics works and of how Parliament works and what the civil service is for. But equally, if you're in charge of a department and your defence is going to be that, shiver me timbers, that was tricky, I didn't understand any of that, then you're on thinner ice, I would argue, than if you were not in charge of that department. 10:38 is the time. Joe is in Exeter. Joe, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Joe.
Hello. I'm a solicitor working in the property field.
This is a freebie. This is a freebie, Joe, all right? You can turn that meter off now, all right? I don't want to be billed by the minute or any of that malarkey. This is a freebie. All right? I'm the only one getting paid here. Carry on.
I'm not giving specific advice to you, James.
Very good.
In property law, when we used to deal with stamp duty, it was much less complicated than it is now. Yes. Because now you've got the second home ownership issue. If you're buying as an overseas resident, you pay more. So now most solicitors that I know of and conveyancers will disclaim and say, we don't give tax advice. We pay your stamp duty as your agent, but you have to get your own tax advice and pay the correct amount. That's down to you. And most solicitors will put that in their reports, and the clients will sign and return saying they understand that. However, I do feel very sorry for Angela, because I think this is probably because of poor communication. Most solicitors and conveyancers will send out forms sometimes with simple algorithms and pointing clients in the direction of information they can find. But if you're an experienced property lawyer or conveyancer, you can instantly see there's going to be a complex issue, and you will send the client to get specific tax advice.
So,
and in this...
Sorry. No, you carry on. You're much more interested than me.
In this case, my understanding is that this involves the trust with a child. Now, my working knowledge of stamp duty in the area of trust, which I'm not an expert, I think that there are different rules with trust involving children.
So it gets really tricky.
It gets more tricky when if you're a parent who is a trustee of a trust involving a child. I think that you could come a cropper with thinking that rules that apply to trustees involving their trust, not relating to children, you're going to pay the lower rate. But if there's a child involved, then the higher rate may apply, and I think that's probably what's happened. There's been miscommunication there.
And she sought advice last Friday from a King's Counsel with expertise in this area, and received the advice that she made public on Wednesday morning. So everything hinges later today, on these two so-called experts in trust law, end quotes, that she says she consulted, but hasn't said whether or not they were qualified solicitors or barristers. And that advice right there, and the calibre of the contributor of that advice, is probably what everything's going to hang on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And my gut instinct is that there's just been miscommunication. I feel sorry for her. I think that she's ended up in this terrible situation, and it's a problem probably not of her own making. However, the conveyancers undoubtedly, obviously I don't know the situation, but undoubtedly will have disclaimed and said your tax affairs are your...
So this is slightly disingenuous reporting when the solicitor in Kent comes out and says, in Herne Bay, comes out and says, we didn't give her any tax advice. Everybody like you, with proper knowledge of the industry, would say, well, of course you didn't. Nobody would have thought that you did. No one would have expected to get stamp duty tax advice from the person handling the conveyancing.
No, I suspect they would have had a disclaimer in their, documentation saying we don't give tax advice, and you're stamp duty land tax is your affair. We will pay it on your behalf. But it's up to you to pay the right amount.
How many? I mean, I'm not expecting you to give me a number, but I mean, how rare is it? How specialised an area is it to have... it's a stamp duty relating to a trust for a disabled child. I mean, you wouldn't find it in Yellow Pages, would you?
No, it's not common. I don't recall having dealt with a transaction involving a trust relating to a child. But obviously, if we have knowledge that the client is a trustee of a trust, then that's the point at which we would say you need to take tax advice on this.
I don't think she is a trustee.
Okay.
So, I mean, curiouser and curiouser said out. I know, that's what I mean. And at what point, finally, and thank you for this, I appreciate you could have charged me a fortune. Finally, when, I mean, the more complicated it is, the easier it is to excuse her and defend her, would you say? Or not? Or does she have... And does that responsibility to make sure that there isn't a mistake increase because she is the housing minister? Because this is more about tax and money than it is actually about housing. Her job is to build houses.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's really easy, though, when you're acting in your capacity as a private individual. You kind of don't really think about the interrelationship with what you're doing when you're just buying a house with something potentially blowing up and destroying your career, do you? And I think she probably just, read the documentation, looked at the algorithms and just thought, oh, okay, well, that's the position for me, and didn't think that she had to go further and take advice. I mean... Yeah. I just can't somehow see her doing something,
And that's an interesting point. As an honest, no, nor can I. But that's our biases kicking in, whether you like that word or not. That's because we think she's an honest and decent person. But, my profession is full of people who thought that Boris Johnson was an honest and decent person, and they were pretty wrong. Maybe we are. And there'll be plenty of people that think because Angela Rayner is left-wing and the Daily Mail have told her that she's evil, that she definitely was swinging the lead or taking the mickey or trying to duck her responsibilities. For example, she could, of course, have just put it all in the name of a partner who didn't have a first home, and then they could have avoided second home stamp duty completely. But she didn't have one. She didn't have a partner, unlike Nigel Farage. Which leads us to the other question of the morning, which is who bought a house in their constituency or claimed to have bought a house in their constituency, only for it to subsequently emerge that the house was in the name of that politician's partner, which would mean probably that they'd be entirely exempt from the second home stamp duty that Angela Rayner is in trouble for not paying. Do you want to have a guess at who that was? 10:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:49 is the time. I'm sorry. I shouldn't tease you like that. Obviously, this is Farage as well. He's the fellow who claimed he'd bought a house in Clacton, I think last year or earlier this year, and it subsequently emerged that it was solely bought by his partner, somebody whose name is Ferrari, but not that one. Absolutely certain of that. And that means, of course, that there is an entirely legal avoidance of any requirement to pay the higher rate of stamp duty that would have been involved had it been an additional residential house in his own name. He already owns other properties. So, well, lo and behold, there's somebody very deliberately and completely legally avoiding second home stamp duty in a way that Angela Rayner, she argues, managed to do so accidentally. I've got another question for you. We might talk about the online safety act, or I'm increasingly baffled by this free speech narrative that's been punted by all the usual clowns. Because what is it that they're not allowed to say? No one's telling me. Well, they come up with some sort of convoluted stories about people hanging around outside abortion clinics, and they tell lies about not being able to say prayers in your own front room. And then there's some question about incitement to violence, but Farage, who's leading the line on this attack on the Online Safety Act, was calling for a comedian in this country to be arrested a few years ago for doing comedy on a comedy programme. So that doesn't hold up to scrutiny either. We may talk about it later, but there's another wrinkle to the story, which who was Culture Secretary when the Online Safety Act was introduced to Parliament? Do you want to have a little guess at that? Who was the Secretary of State for Culture when the Online Safety Act, with which Farage's party have such an epic problem that they were prepared to go to America and call upon a foreign government to interfere in our political affairs, our legislative affairs? Who was Culture Secretary when that Online Safety Act was actually introduced to Parliament? 10:51 is the time. Back to the question that is perhaps rather harder to answer. What do we think happened with Angela Rayner's stamp duty story? And I mean, who would you go to if you needed advice involving a trust that had been set up for a disabled child? That's not an excuse, it's a question. Paula is in Camberley. Paula, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. You have to excuse me, I'm a little bit nervous. But
it's only me.
There's nothing only about you, James.
Put that on a T-shirt. Carry on, Paula.
So the solicitor you had on just now is basically saying solicitors don't accept any responsibility for stamp duty. But that's something that they deal with on a daily basis. And because it's a tax, they'll refer it to accountants who only deal with stamp duty because solicitors. I don't want to start a fight, but it's something that quite often.
No, but just the behaviour of the solicitor in this case hasn't shocked anybody. Dan Needle from Tax Policy Association said it would have been very unusual for a conveyancer to advise a client, and mine as well. It would have been very unusual for a conveyancer to advise a client on an area as specialised as stamp duty relating to a trust for a disabled child.
Quite often they don't even ask the question. That are there any trusts kicking around? So the handling of it is quite poor. It depends on the solicitor you go to. But my understanding of the trust was that it arose from a compensation award. So this predates anything to do with the properties. And in that case, I wouldn't have expected it to be what we call a settler interested trust, because it wasn't the parents that were actually providing the funds.
Right.
So, yes.
Will there be a mixture of funds? Because I don't think the home was bought outright with the money from the compensation. There'll be a mixture of contributions, including increased equity over the course of the period of ownership.
So if the purchase of the former home was made from the original award to the child, then that's got nothing to do with the parents. But if they've added in the property to the fund, then, there is a bit of a murky, self-settled arrangement going on, which, yes, it will do all sorts of things with the tax structures. So
this is your world, I think, the trusts particularly.
Yeah, right. Well, kind of, trust particularly, yeah. So I think from understanding from that position, the parents may not even have thought that there was any sort of connection between them and that trust, because the funding came from third parties, which would take it out of the scope of it being their property.
I think that the sources of the money are not 100% the compensation settlement, but she has no equity in that property that is now held in trust. So that would be the reason why she could conceivably have thought she had no need to declare it. If I'd come to you, what advice would you have given me? I'm buying a house in Hove, but I've come to a trust expert, because she says she's spoken to 2 experts in trust law, which means that they must have known about the trust, because they're experts in trust law.
But would they know about stamp duty? Stamp duty
That's
is
what
like...
I was coming to. It's like I've got 2 experts here and never the twain shall meet.
Yeah. As I say, solicitors say they don't deal with stamp duty because it's a tax, and accountants can't deal with stamp duty unless they've done sort of intensive research and training on it, because it's not part of the area that we would normally deal with on a day-to-day basis, so it does fall down between 2 stools, unfortunately.
And does that enhance your sympathy for her, or is that a wasted energy?
I didn't actually take much to her. I'd seen her on TV from time to time, and it wasn't until I listened to your is it Full Disclosure with her a few weeks ago. She comes across as sort of genuine and straight.
Well, I think so as well. We could be wrong. I don't think we are, but time will tell. And therefore, looking at the mess that she's got herself into, it's a mess that, I mean, would you say it could have happened to almost anybody if they were...
Yeah. I mean, I deal with very clever people who are good.
Well, thank you for stepping down. Thank you for stepping down today. And they could easily. That's why people like you exist. That's why experts exist. So that there's incredibly difficult labyrinths can be successfully navigated, but often they're not successfully navigated, which is how people end up in the mess that Angela Rayner has ended up in. It's funny, isn't it? The pendulum has swung quite a lot over the last 2 or 3 days, and it's not swinging anymore because we can wait for Laurie Magnus's findings. Thank goodness we actually have a government who recognises the importance of an independent ethics advisor rather than Liz Truss, who didn't have one at all, Boris Johnson, who had 2 resign in disgust at his contempt for the ministerial code and for the findings of their own investigations into, I think, the fellow who paid for his flat to be redecorated, and the bullying allegations against Priti Patel are just absolutely riding roughshod over the need for integrity and ethics in Downing Street. That's what it is. If you think that you need integrity and ethics in Downing Street, you need an independent advisor. If you don't think that you need integrity and ethics in Downing Street, then you might profess confusion about why you need an ethics advisor, or of course you might be a big cheerleader for Boris Johnson, who dispensed with them altogether and never got around to replacing them. It was Rishi Sunak who appointed the current fella. Thank you, Paula. Richard is in Whittam. Richard, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Great show. Thank you very much for letting me on. Basically, I just want to talk about the ethics side of it. So I come from a working class background, recently gone through a house move. Basically, I employed an independent financial advisor and a mortgage advisor. It cost me 180 quid. It's the best money I've ever spent. So that's me from a very basic background, not a privileged background like she's in now at the moment, Deputy Prime Minister. I was given quite clear advice, basically around the stamp duty, and like other callers have said, I went on me and my partner, we monitored it all the way through what the stamp duty was going to be, because it basically governed what we could afford. So we had our eyes on it all the way through.
Yes.
I don't believe for a second, I don't know the Deputy Prime Minister, not a big fan of her, but I think she's entitled to an independent review. Of course she is. But I don't believe 1 second that she wasn't aware that what she was doing was potentially crossing the boundaries of illegality.
Well, I mean, I don't want to malign them, but you haven't named them, so I can say this. I would be absolutely staggered if the people who advised you were qualified to advise upon a situation that involved the trust for a disabled child. I just spoke to someone who literally works in this field and explained that this is, to take a minefield crossed with a maze, crossed with something else that's very hard to navigate. And the number of people that would be able to give you the advice that you clearly needed would be absolutely tiny. So I'm not sure that your recent experience is as relevant to your position as you think it is.
Well, you see, it's the advice I was given, because basically my house, it fell through, and I basically sought the advice of this independent financial advisor, and they gave me very clear guidance.
Yeah, but loads of people could do that. Whereas what we've just heard is that the person giving you advice about the trust is not qualified to give you advice about the stamp duty, and the person giving you advice about the stamp duty is not qualified to give you advice about the trust. So that's why she ends up with a King's Counsel who presumably cost a king's ransom, because these people are on thousands and thousands of pounds an hour. And that then becomes the only person that you don't even know you need that advice until you find yourself in the sort of hot water that Angela Rayner has found herself in. So your impulse, and this is fair enough, and it's as fair as my impulse or the last lady's impulse, that Angela Rayner is an honest and a stand-up person. Your impulse is that she isn't, and that she's... I mean, it would be an act of epic stupidity to think that you could get away with it, wouldn't it? For someone as scrutinised as her?
May I add one last point?
Of course you may, yeah.
About integrity. So, in my line of work, integrity is non-negotiable. Simple as that. This is a Deputy Prime Minister. This is someone who potentially could be leading the country if Keir Starmer were to step down. So, if this is being questioned now, that causes a massive problem. People look up to the Deputy Prime Minister in whichever party it is. The integrity issue, it cannot be muddied in the waters of political groundings.
Which is absolutely why you need an independent ethics advisor. Yeah. It actually helps in this case that this fellow was appointed by a Conservative Prime Minister, because no one is even going to be able to disingenuously turn around and say, oh, well, that's not worth the paper it's printed on. He was appointed by Labour and he's come out in favour of Labour, which is not what happens. These people are incredibly conscientious and careful. That's why they resign when Prime Ministers ignore their advice. But that's the point, isn't it? He is looking at whether or not anything in this saga impugns her integrity. And if it does, she's toast.
She's got a leg to stand on, given all the information we've got.
And there it is. So I once again, it's a little slice of wait and see pie. What is going to happen? But you know, I'm glad Richard rang in, because you're perfectly entitled to look at Angela Rayner and not trust her. That's the nature of public life, whether you like it or not. You don't get to control how people react to you. And you're perfectly capable to look at Angela Rayner and not trust her without having been subjected to years of abuse and very, very snobbish criticism from right-wing figures and right-wing media. Sometimes we warm to people and sometimes we don't. Some people still look at Nigel Farage and don't see the reality of what he is. Lots of people actually judging by the opinion poll. So, you know, you sit there and judge. We've all looked at people and got them wrong. That's where the curse of O'Brien comes from. It is 1 minute after 11. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A couple of other stories around today that I want to talk to you about. I don't know if you're aware of what's happening in the world of rentals, but it's of epic significance to just about everybody in the country. And I wonder, Friday might be a good day to get stuck into a puzzle that has been posed on the programme now several times, but we're no closer to an answer.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 5 minutes after 11, and this is a bit different, and I'm going to need your help with this properly, because it's not actually a story that leaps fully formed from a headline or an easily comprehensible story. You are aware that efforts are underway to claim that we have a free speech problem in this country. And the evidence provided for this claim is a little bit hard to pin down. You have a woman who essentially called for a pogrom. I think if you're confused about the Lucy Conley story, you need to ask how you would feel if it was your house that she was encouraging people to set fire to while you and your family were in it. That's the best. And you may still think that is a free speech issue and she should be free to do that. But there it is. Or actually, it's even worse than that, isn't it? It's if she was calling for every Tudor conversion or every Victorian terrace. You take a certain type of building and then call for them to be set on fire while people are still in them. A certain type of person perhaps still in them. But that's the absolute principle. So I don't really see how anybody could be claiming that is something we should be relaxed about, that you want social media to be full tomorrow night of people calling for the building that you and your family are sleeping in to be set on fire. If you'd done something horribly wrong, maybe you could just about defend it on metaphorical grounds, but if you've done absolutely nothing wrong, you are leading a blameless existence, and somebody encourages a group of people known to exist to go and set fire to your house, then you probably would change your view on free speech. That's why it's very, very odd that she's been turned into a martyr. Mark Rowley, the head of the Metropolitan Police, made a fairly compelling explanation of why the comedy writer Graham Linehan was arrested at Heathrow this week after he called for violence against a protected group. Most people felt, myself included, that was unfortunate. But the explanation given by the Metropolitan Police Commissioner made it less confusing. Still unfortunate, still something that, for my money, should not have happened in the way that it happened. But the account given by Mark Rowley was fairly compelling, and it's easily fixed. You know, it's just that tricky thing of when something that appears to be an incitement to violence should be taken seriously and when it shouldn't. Which brings us back to Joe Brand, who joked a few years ago about replacing milkshakes that were being thrown at prominent politicians with battery acid, and immediately said on the comedy programme, the deliberately provocative comedy programme upon which she said it, that she was joking, and of course she didn't mean it, and she didn't even like the milkshakes being thrown at people. But dishonest politicians and pundits pretended that this was something that it wasn't, and actually called for her to be arrested. Nigel Farage, for example, called for her to be arrested, and yet he was in Washington this week claiming that because people are being arrested for incitement to violence, where there is no defence based upon it being a joke, we have a free speech problem. So you have a politician, and it's not just about him, this. You have a politician who calls for a comedian who is obviously making a joke to be arrested, but simultaneously claims that we have a free speech problem when somebody calling for violence against others, and is categorically not joking, in the case of Lucy Conley, that is somehow a free speech issue. I don't know how many times I should say this, because it's so Brexity, isn't it? It's so denying the evidence of your own eyes and ears. It's so obviously not a matter of principle or ideology for the people claiming that we have a free speech problem, because, well, none of them complained, for example, when Nadine Dorries kept calling for me to get sacked for telling the truth about her. So where were all these free speech warriors when people were trying to cancel me, when an actual government minister was trying to get me fired, and she was so stupid she admitted it publicly? Absolutely extraordinary. But again, let's keep it bigger than individuals. Farage is just the sort of figurehead at the moment of these ludicrous claims. I want that comedian arrested for doing a joke, but it's outrageous that woman who wasn't joking got arrested for calling for people to be burned in their beds. Right. And then J.D. Vance, of course, went to Germany and made a speech about how we have free speech problems in this country that are much more serious than anything that's going on in Russia or China, or words to that effect. And I don't understand two things. I don't understand what the goal is here. It can't just be that the richest men in the world, as in the people that own the media, the tech platforms, the richest men in the world don't want to foot the bill for decent regulation. It can't be that, can it? It can't just be that your Musks and your Zuckerbergs, and in fact, Musk wasn't there, but a lot of them were with Donald Trump yesterday, essentially queuing up to tell him how wonderful he is. I don't know if you remember Flash Gordon, The Wrath of Khan. Do you remember that? And Ming the Merciless. And various emissaries from various planets are queuing up to tell Ming the Merciless how fantastic he is. And they have to bring him gifts. And one of them says, we bring our loyalty. And he's not, I don't want your loyalty, I want space diamonds. It was a bit like that, except Donald Trump was playing the role of Ming the Merciless, and the richest men in the world were playing the role of the supplicants, the sort of knee-bending sycophants. Is it as simple as them lobbying, using their access to power, to avoid responsibility for the regulation of the platforms that they control? It's Online Safety Day again on LBC on Monday, and I don't know that there's a day in our calendar that is as poignant as that, because some of the stories that we hear about some of the consequences of unregulated, uncontrolled, essentially, social media are absolutely heartbreaking. Now, like all legislation, I'm sure the Online Safety Act is imperfect, but what I don't understand, and I've conducted an interview with a lawyer for the family of a young man who's taken his own life in circumstances that I can't believe. It's so utterly hideous. And so the family would argue, I think with some justification, so entirely a consequence of the interaction with technology that the young man pursued. So the idea that none of these companies should be responsible for anything that happens, and therefore should not be required to pay for any form of regulation. There's a journalist, is it a journalist, I suppose? I don't know how he describes himself. He's a very, very good egg and a great force for good in public discourse, Sundar Katawala. And he has been detailing on Elon Musk's platform how commonplace it is now to see the phrase P word, go home, or go home, you smelly P word. Absolutely no sanction, no punishment, no pushback. So if you're worried about free speech because you're a racist, then you're fine on Twitter. You can be as violent, as disgusting as you want. You can say things on there that you couldn't say 4 years ago without getting caught. It wasn't the Wrath of Khan. That was a Star Trek movie. It was just Flash Gordon, Ming the Merciless. Why am I talking about the Wrath of Khan when Ming the Merciless was the bad? That's two massive mistakes today. I can only apologise. Put the solicitors in the wrong county, and I've got the wrong intergalactic merciless warlord in the context of two very, very different films. But I digress. It's amazing the things you pick me up on. I'm trying to launch a phone-in about quite a complicated and tricky question that I think might be turning into the next sort of Brexity flavoured abomination to be visited upon this country. And you're picking me up on getting Star Trek and Flash Gordon mixed up. But hey-ho, facts matter. Ming the Merciless has absolutely nothing to do with Star Trek, and the Wrath of Khan has absolutely nothing to do with Flash Gordon. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. So they are really, really pushing this to the point where they invite Farage to Washington to pretend that we've got a free speech problem, even though he's the man that actually wanted a comedian to be arrested. So why? And now you've got the really curious scenario, which adds to the idea that there is something very suspicious going on here, something very fishy. The woman who, as Secretary of State for Culture, introduced the Online Safety Act to Parliament, arguably the only measurable achievement of her entire political career as Culture Secretary, that woman was Nadine Dorries, who, I don't know if you can defect if you're not in a party, but she is now joining the party that is passionately opposed to the Online Safety Act, which exists in large part to protect children from online sexual exploitation and sexual abuse. So what's going on? I don't know that we need to focus unduly on the individuals, whether it's me or Dorries or Farage, or J.D. Vance, because there is I read it in the Daily Mail claiming that we now live in North Korea. What can the Daily Mail not print that they want to print? If you run through some of the headlines that they've printed in recent years, it's hard to think of a more compelling item of evidence to prove that you can say whatever the heck you want in this country, however bonkers it is. You can even stick it on the front page of a newspaper without facing any sanction. You can call parliamentarians saboteurs. You can use the language of 1930s Germany to describe elected parliamentarians, which they did with crush the saboteurs. And if that's unfair, if that's not the language of 1930s Germany, spoiler alert it is, then enemies of the people for a front page describing High Court judges categorically has echoes of 1930s Germany. Where is this threat to my freedom of speech? And where were, I keep saying I'm not going to make it personal, but where were all the people who described themselves as free speech warriors when they were trying to get me cancelled? They're trying to get me cancelled all the time. Up to and including a Secretary of State for Culture publicly calling for me to be fired for telling the truth about how ridiculous she is. So where's the free speech crisis? Okay? That, I don't think, is a phone-in, because I'm not sure there is one. I'm not sure you can point at it. So I really, really want your answers to this question, even if you're not 100% certain of them, because together we might be able to build something quite convincing. What's going on? What's going on? Why are some of the most powerful people on the planet and some of the richest people on the planet and some of their poodles, like Nigel Farage and Daily Mail columnists, trying to create the idea that our free speech in this country is under threat? Why is it happening? Because our free speech is not under threat. You know, calls for me to be cancelled or fired or taken off air notwithstanding, our free speech is not under threat. I can say to you, within the laws of libel, whatever I want to say every single day, 5 days a week, 40-something weeks a year. So why are they claiming? Why are they pretending? What is it designed to achieve? Remember, they convinced the country that being in the European Union was reducing our freedoms, making us poorer and exposing us to unbearable levels of immigration. Since we left the European Union, we have got poorer, we have got higher levels of immigration, and our freedoms have stayed more or less exactly the same, except for the biggest one of all, which is our freedom of movement, which got abolished. So don't think for a minute that when these forces combine, They are not capable of persuading a country to act against its own interests, persuading a population to act against its own interests in order to do the bidding of the people pulling the strings. Brexit is a very, very good example of that. And it's the same people. It's exactly the same people who are now claiming that you and I are victims of a clampdown on our free speech. Why are they doing it? I really, really want your help with this, because the evidence of hypocrisy is extraordinary. And the evidence of Trump clamping down on free speech in a very real and measurable and deeply fascistic way is as long as your arm. I'll share some of that with you shortly. So if you needed proof that there's something very rum going on here, then here's Donald Trump clamping down on free speech in colleges, clamping down on free media, clamping down on television presenters. Here is Donald Trump trying to silence all dissent using the instruments of government, while simultaneously claiming that we in the United Kingdom have a problem. There is no problem. That's not a phone-in. That's another Brexit echo. I do a phone-in now on what is the problem? Is there a problem? Then you're almost giving oxygen to the idea that there is. There is not a free speech problem in this country. There's a little bit of tweaking needed on incitement to violence when it's a joke and incitement to violence when it isn't. I don't know who sits in judgment on that, but the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, is confident he's got some of the answers to those questions. So let's park that. There is no attack on your free speech in this country. We are not, spoiler alert, turning into North Korea. So why are almost all the people who sold us the lies of Brexit now selling us the lies about our free speech? Why? This is the crucial question. Why are they doing it? What are they up to? I still don't know what they thought they were going to gain from pulling us out of the European Union. But spoiler alert, they didn't get it. What the heck is the reasoning behind these ludicrous, hysterical, pant-wetting claims that we're turning into North Korea or we can't say what we want to say in this country anymore, when the architect of this movement is clamping down on free speech in the United States of America in ways that liberal democracies have rarely seen, if ever, in history? Hit the numbers now. You will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 23 minutes after 11, and hey, feel free to critique my analysis, but I think you'll struggle to pull parts of it apart. It is exactly the same engines of misinformation that brought us Brexit that are now trying to portray our country as a place where you don't enjoy free speech, okay? And I don't know why they're doing it, because it is obviously not true. Apart from this need for a little more nuance in the enforcement of incitement to violence legislation, there is absolutely no way you can claim that this country is, for example, that the population of this country or the media in this country is in any way less free than it is in the United States of America, where Donald Trump is attacking educational institutions, he's attacking media institutions, he's attacking individuals, and seeking to silence all dissent, hiring people supremely unqualified to do their job simply because they will never say boo to his particular goose. Why are they doing it? And the tech bros are 100% either behind it or on board with it. The Musks. Why was Musk so desperate to be so close to Donald Trump? What is the end game? Why are they doing this? Why is in a sense, and this might be a bit bonkers, the new Brexit is free speech, where the liars, well, they won last time. Last time the liars won. Why are they lying this time? Why are they doing it? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Yazine is in Lewisham to kick things off. And remember, this is the first time anyone's asked you this question, and it's not led by any other media, so your answers are all valid and all valuable. But we're unlikely to pin it down precisely by 12 o'clock today. Sorry, Yazine, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, Mr. James. I'm a big fan of yours.
Top man, very wise.
You are a very professional person, and I really admire your professionalism.
Thank you.
have evidence for you to prove to you that Nigel Farage is exercising free speech in the UK. It's talking nonsense. I have a strong evidence for you.
This isn't a great phone line, I'm afraid, Yazin, although I'm delighted I could hear your kind compliments. I thought there might have been a big butt coming. Do you know why people, whoever it is, are working so hard to portray our country so dishonestly?
Well, to be honest with you, you may open an investigation and see any tech donors to the Nigel Farage party. Maybe they're pushing their luck to change, to put the British government under pressure to change the legislation to put the platforms in chaotic.
Because they're terrified of the Online Safety Act, which Nadine Dorries, who's a recent arrival in Nigel Farage's political party, introduced to Parliament. Again, I apologise that I can't talk to you for longer, but the phone line is unsustainable. That might be part of it, but then we need to know, what is it about the Online Safety Act that they hate so much? It's imperfect, all legislation is, but the idea that these platforms should be taking more responsibility for much of the filth that is on there, whether you're talking about websites encouraging self-harm or encouraging terrible eating disorders or even encouraging suicide, or whether you're talking about exposure to hideous pornography, creating a market for images of child sexual abuse. Why on earth would anybody not want more regulation of that space in those areas? And why are they pretending that we've got a free speech problem in this country? Mark's in County Durham. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I think you're on the track with the financial thing, because they've always claimed they're a platform, not a publisher.
Yes.
Which obviously I think is the major thing they're worried about. So it's profit. But then again, I think they also want to have us as a Trump America. They want to move us towards that. I think they actually, it's part of a plan to leave the ECHR, potentially try and bring the government down, because they're absolutely terrified of anything slightly socialist.
I don't think anyone's ever accused Keir Starmer in his latest iteration as Prime Minister of being slightly socialist. But the idea...
It is to them.
No, that's a very good point. And the idea that after a very successful experiment with letting wealth have almost untrammeled power in this country, they're now terrified of really? I mean, he's such an unterrifying figure, but they're just...
No, it's the whole concept. You've got Ed Miliband, who might bring the green thing, and once they've got the green stuff in and they've got a lot more let's say solar and wind and stuff, then the fossil fuel lobby will start losing money. Who funds them? Farage they're funded by Farage,
or the other way around. And why would these institutions abandon the Tory party? Because they don't think the Tory party is going to be in a position to help them keep the money taps on come Actually, apparently Richard Littlejohn called Keir Starmer a socialist in his column today, but hey-ho, this is the paper that is wondering when we turned into North Korea. So they've all gone even madder than they did when they were all telling us that leaving the European Union would make us richer, more safe and more free. What, apart from the money, what is in it for them?
The money is big, but also they would like Farage to have us basically as a colony of the United States. They'd like to bring down the government. I think they were quite disappointed with the hotel protest, that it wasn't as big as the South 40 Farage-style riots. I don't think it really got the traction they wanted. It was very noisy.
It didn't. They were desperate for violence. I mean, even describing sort of 13 people and their dog turning up as a massive protest. So, I mean, you're probably right to knit the two things together, and yet in a way they explode each other. If we had a freedom of speech crisis, you wouldn't be able to have a gathering of masked racists outside a former hotel full of asylum seekers calling for them to be sent away. You're only going to get into trouble with the authorities when you start throwing bricks at the police or trying to set fire to the building. The actual protest, this is where Keir Starmer sometimes seems to be on a hiding to nothing. It's a form of terrorism, perhaps, to stand outside someone's house shouting abuse at the people inside. But he hasn't. No one has attacked that. No one has got arrested for standing up with a placard saying something like "Save our children" or "Protect our women." Brackets, don't mention the fact that we brought into Parliament a bloke who'd been banged up for battering his ex-girlfriend as a Reform MP, close brackets. So, I mean, it's even more evidence that there's no free speech crisis. Maybe they wanted the violence so that the police would clamp down on the violence, and then they could claim, you see, you're not even allowed to protest anymore. And because the world of the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph is so bent and corrupt, they wouldn't mention the fact that the only people who got arrested were people who were setting fire to buildings or throwing bricks at the police. Nobody got arrested for peaceful protest. And, of course, the people who do get arrested for peaceful protest in this country, usually environmental campaigners, possibly even some people showing solidarity with the people of Gaza, they're never cited as victims of a clampdown on free speech by the people claiming that there's a clampdown on free speech. In fact, if you were to confine your analysis to newspaper columnists and radio presenters, they bloody love it when Just Stop Oil are getting banged up or dragged off the streets for protesting peacefully. So the only people who, it seems to me, have got into any trouble for protesting peacefully in this country are the people marching in solidarity with Palestine, who get called terrorists or terrorist sympathisers by people like Suella Braverman, or the environmental campaigners who get carted off and banged up for staging sit-ins. It's insane to claim that there is a clampdown on free speech of the people making the claim. So why are they doing it? Dominic Ellis is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:35, and the question of why are they doing it is the one that I want you to answer. You have the ludicrous spectacle of the woman who introduced the Online Safety Act to Parliament joining a party that is passionately opposed to the Online Safety Act, so much so that a man who once claimed that American politicians should have absolutely nothing to do with UK politics sat in Washington this week begging American politicians to interfere in UK politics on the grounds that the same man, of course, who was recently calling for a comedian to be arrested for doing comedy, but claims that you shouldn't be arrested for calling for people to be set on fire in their own homes. And on the grounds that free speech is somehow under threat. Now, it obviously isn't, and I'm going to need you to remind me in months to come that it just isn't, because we're all frogs getting boiled. The longer it goes on, Daily Mail's already gone completely insane. When did we turn in? Millions of people are asking when we turned into North Korea. Spoiler alert, we haven't turned into North Korea. But that frog boiling process, it becomes so all-encompassing. It's hard to get a beeline out of it, especially since Musk bought Twitter. Not a publisher, but a platform. Then why did he buy it, and why has it changed beyond all recognition since he did, if it's just a platform, not a publisher? Answers on a postcard, please. What's the end game? Why did they hate Twitter so much, which was one of the rare places where you didn't need the patronage of a billionaire media owner in order to have a big platform? Why? Why are they pretending that our free speech is under threat? What's the end game? What's the goal? 0345 6060 973. Vanessa is in Glasgow. Vanessa, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James.
Hello, Vanessa.
I'm wondering, have you heard of the tactic of accusations in a mirror?
I think this is Goebbels, isn't it? Saying accuse your enemy of doing what it is that you want to do.
Exactly. And that's what I'm seeing here. So basically, the idea is to set up an us and them. So the enemy is the woke crowd, the lefties, the government, the migrants, and that's why your life is so bad. And so come and vote for me and I'll do things for you. That's the idea. So this government, you're not allowed to say what you want to say in this country anymore, and you can only sustain that as a political campaigning position if nobody asks you what it is you're not allowed to say. Exactly. And it's also a way of breaking down hate speech as saying it's free speech. There's a reason why we have hate speech laws. Yes, of course there is. Because they create harm. So the idea is, again, to create an us and them and for a new normal. So before Trump's first term, the idea of alternative facts wasn't a thing. And I always try to make the difference between common sense and good sense. Common sense, if you say it often enough and loud enough, it becomes common sense. Good sense is good sense. Things that make sense.
This is
so it's trying to create a new concept.
A couple of messages saying every accusation is an admission, every accusation is a confession. So if you are in some ways this is too straightforward. If you are in the business of clamping down violently on free speech, then one of the best ways to avoid responsibility for it is to point over there and accuse someone who isn't of doing all the things that you actually are doing. Imagine if Keir Starmer was removing funding from universities because they were teaching facts that he didn't like, or they were hosting events that he disapproved of. It would be extraordinary. And yet that's literally happening in the country that's accusing us of having a free speech problem. What's the end game, though? What's it designed to achieve? Just power, more power. Why do the tech bros go along with it? So why are the oligarchs all on board?
It is about power. It's about controlling the narrative. If you can control the narrative and what people think, that is power in itself.
If we're protecting free speech, we couldn't possibly be the ones who are damaging it.
And I mean, if you look at it, okay, Goebbels and Nazi Germany is one of the biggest examples, but if you look at it in Rwanda and what happened in Rwanda, what was happening was they were creating violent situations and then blaming their enemy on the violent situations and on terrorism.
They had an entire radio station dedicated to doing so, of course.
Yeah. And so when you create, for instance, the riots or the violence that you saw in and around the Southport issues and beyond that, and then they will say, but migrants are violent, migrants are criminals, we need to get out the migrants. So they're accusing their enemy and they're creating the enemy as migrants, as the state, because the state had to come in and stop them from burning a hotel. Then they're violent against us and we're just innocent people. We're like you. And it's trying to create an us and them situation that come to us because we're like you.
But I mean, the hypocrisy is almost too big to
it's beyond hypocrisy.
It is beyond hypocrisy. So you've got Farage writing an article defending Lucy Conley for literally calling for people to be burned in their beds. Yeah. And he called for someone to be arrested a couple of years ago for doing a comedy on a comedy programme. So the idea that there's any point in trying to intellectually analyse this process is absurd.
But this is what makes it dangerous, James. A lot of people are saying it's hypocrisy. It is not hypocrisy. It is intentional manipulation, trying to change people's minds and see us as the victim, come to us. We're like you.
How excessive does this sound? Oligarchs are currently trying to conduct a coup and seize global power so they can dispense with government and democracy as we know it.
I mean, they already have the power. Political power isn't real power. Economic power is real power, and they already have economic power. So why would they overthrow governments when they're actually doing what the rich want them to do?
Mm. And they don't need to. I mean, if Donald Trump is the government, they don't need to overthrow it. They just need to pay homage to him occasionally.
Starmer is the government, and he doesn't need to be overthrown because he's not introducing wealth taxes. You know, so it goes both ways, whether it's Social Democrat or whether it's...
This is where Starmer fascinates me. He's gone far enough to scare the bejesus out of all of these characters, but gone nowhere near far enough to please the people that voted for him yet.
Exactly. Because the people who voted for him expected something in their real lives immediately to change, and it didn't. So, and that's the problem. There's no patience for actual deliverance.
So the big alarm bell was probably Musk buying Twitter, which was essentially kind of evidence-based and therefore a little bit liberal. And if you were vilely racist on there, or you were deliberately and obviously insightful and lying, you'd eventually possibly get your tweets deleted or get your account closed down.
Well, again, I think Musk created a new normal. Yes. Just like Trump did in his first term, the new normal, where he got rid of fact checkers, where he got rid of red tape, what they see as red tape, and it was actually protecting vulnerable people on that platform. So there's a new normal, and now Facebook are following suit, YouTube are following suit, and that's one of the biggest issues there.
And some of the camouflage is provided by the fact that the honest stuff is still up there, so it's not like a coup. But
because of the algorithm, a lot of people don't see it.
And it looks equal. It looks like yin and yang.
It's giving equal credence to
lies
minority
and truth.
views.
To lies and truth.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to alternative facts. That's really strong. Thank you. Oh, Lord. I mean, thank you for your insights, but you've not exactly cheered me up on this question of why are they doing it. Is the answer likely to be less significant and less serious than the one Vanessa provides? Why would you do it? Why would a man... I know he's profoundly... well, use whatever word you want. But why would a man who last week wanted a comedian arrested for doing comedy suddenly be pretending that arresting people for inciting violence is a problem in this country? Why? What? I mean, unless it is just a simple quid pro quo. In which case, what's the quo? What do the tech bros get out of this? Answer: absolute absence of regulation. I'm going to sound like that old meme about the Roman Empire now. I think about the medieval era quite a lot. And the reason why I think about it quite a lot is twofold. The first is I read a lot of historical fiction set in the medieval era. And the second is the history I was taught in school made heroes of all of these people. That's why Hilary Mantel's books are so powerful, because they kind of reset the narrative a little bit. But Henry VIII was a sort of syphilitic psychopath who killed his own wives. And yet, if you were at school in this country in the 1970s or the 1980s, he was portrayed as a sort of heroic figure. And the distribution of wealth in this country is all currently pretty grim. It was much more grim in the 19th century. But if you go back to the 16th century, the 17th century, you didn't have patronage, you died. The wealth accrued. Look at the stately homes that exist in this country now. And ask yourself how many people starved to death during the period of time in which that stately home was built. How many children, how many infants, how many babies were handed over to a foundling hospital when those stately... The amount of wealth you need to build a castle, to build a palace, can only really be accrued if some people in that country have absolutely nothing at all. And the reason I think about it a lot is because I think that those people... Humanity hasn't changed. I think the people that would sort of step over the corpses of starved humans in order to get into their own palace, I think they still exist. There's something kicks in, whether you start off that greedy or whether you become that greedy in the course of it, and they find everything, every single obstacle to their constant self-enrichment obnoxious. And they find people like Cromwell or Cranmer, they find people to help them. The people who don't end up with all the money, but end up with a lot more of it than you and I would get, they're the ones that help them. They're the ones who move in the realms of politics and media, and they are doing the bidding of the people who want to be sort of latter-day barons, or actual barons, of course, in some cases. And that, somewhere, this whole free speech conversation slots into that paradigm. I don't know exactly where. But under Elizabeth I, if someone reported you for saying something nasty about her, you could be locked up. The free speech in this country is a relatively recent arrival and one that we should cherish. And yet people are claiming that it is under threat from what? And why are they doing it? I think we're going to get the report on Angela Rayner's tax affairs while we're on air. It may even be imminent, so do stand by for that. I can tell you how serious things are. Some television channels are carrying footage of the front door of Downing Street. You know that something big is about to happen when all you can see on your television channel, all you can see on your television screen is is footage of a door through which a rather hapless character has just walked and is now walking back in again. And a police officer is also present. So we are about to... But that's always the case. Don't read too much into that. The police officer is always present outside Downing Street. No one's getting arrested, as far as I know. I should stop talking now. It's 11:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10 to 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. There is an awful lot of chatter, including from some people who ordinarily do know what they're talking about, involving Angela Rayner's current situation, and not to over-egg the pudding, it is not chatter that will be particularly welcome to people hoping that she would be staying in her job or jobs, but we will wait until we know for certain what is occurring before we wade back into that territory. Slight change of pace now. Still want your calls on why this free speech confection, or these free speech lies are being confected by members of far-right government and media. But I want to turn your attention to something that you may have missed earlier this week. The world's leading association of genocide scholars has declared that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. I speak of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, who have stated that Israel's conduct meets the legal definition as laid out in the UN Convention on Genocide. Professor Dr. Tim Williams is the Professor of Insecurity and Social Order at the University of the Bundeswehr in Munich, and he is a member of the International Association of Genocide Scholars. How was this decision arrived at, Tim? How was this decision reached?
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me. Basically, members, any member is allowed to propose a resolution. And in this case, 3 members wrote a resolution recognizing the genocide. It goes through a process of peer review within the organization, and then our members are allowed to vote on it. And in this case, 86% of the voting members voted to approve it, which means that as a whole, as the organization, we now recognize that genocide is occurring in Gaza, according to the UN Convention, to the legal definition.
We should add that it is 28% of the membership that voted, and 86% of that 28% came down in the way that you describe.
That's relatively usual, because only members who have an expertise on a specific question will normally vote.
So of the 500 members, many would not particularly be focused upon the events that are unfolding in Gaza at the moment. And what sort of events, what are the kind of clinching factors for the 86% of voters who supported the resolution?
Yeah, so for genocide to be occurring legally, there has to be an intent to destroy a protected group. And in this case, it's the nation of the Palestinians in Gaza. And there are 5 different ways that destruction can happen. And we see several of those in Gaza. There's killing of members of the group. When the resolution was penned, it was already 59,000 dead, 140,000 bodily harms, physical injuries, and many more have been mentally harmed. A third way in which genocide can occur is through inflicting group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction. So what that means in the case of Gaza is the destruction of agricultural fields, warehouses, bakeries, which are leading to starvation, the limitation of humanitarian aid into the country, destruction of residential housing, 90% has been destroyed, the medical system, clean water facilities. All that is destroying the foundations of life, meaning that the nation of Palestinians can no longer live in Gaza and are being destroyed as a group.
What impact is this likely to have? I know that the 3-page resolution was published earlier this week and contains a litany of actions undertaken by Israel over the last 22 months, but it's unlikely to change much, isn't it?
Yeah. As an organisation of scholars, what we do is we evaluate the evidence that we see, and we say that from an academic perspective, this is what we think has happened or is happening. But it doesn't have any legal consequences, any direct political consequences, but we are seeing that the world is listening. I'm speaking to you today, we're hearing, and I think that it gives politicians who recognize that the genocide is occurring an academic credibility to also say that now.
Just for context, if you don't mind, when was the association set up and what is its sort of overarching purpose?
We were founded in 1994, and the purpose is to facilitate research collaboration between people working on genocide. So we have people working on the Holocaust, on Cambodian genocide, Rwandan genocide, and we do conferences, we have an academic journal, and one of the things we do is also publish resolutions, but that's just one of the things we do. It's a very boring and mundane academic association, really.
Well, except dealing with the some of the biggest issues of our time and indeed of history. As you probably know, the Israeli Foreign Ministry has said that the report was based on Hamas lies and poor research, calling it an embarrassment to the legal profession.
Yes, they have said that. I think it's in Israel's government's interest to try and spread this perspective. But the research that the academic community has done over the now almost 2 years really points to the fact that there is genocide happening. Just because the perpetrators of a genocide say that it's not happening and that the people accusing them of it are lying, that doesn't mean it's true. If you look at the data, and there's been a lot of effort over particularly the last year, to try and look at the difficult data that is there and use the academic methods that we have to deal with that uncertainty and to try and really understand what's happening and evaluate what that means legally. Like I said, the majority of our voters believe that is now sufficient to class it as genocide.
And as you will know, your resolution followed on to Israel human rights organisations, but Salem and Physicians for Human Rights Israel also releasing reports towards the end of July that concluded Israel's conduct in Gaza constitutes genocide. And again, an Israeli government spokesman strongly rejected those accusations. I don't know if it's fair. I don't think we mentioned beforehand that we were going to raise this, but the Israeli president is due to visit this country this week, and there are calls for Keir Starmer not to meet with him. Given your organisation's findings, I mean, should that... I'm not going to ask you your opinion. I'm going to ask you whether or not you think your organisation's findings should be influencing the Prime Minister's thinking in this space.
Absolutely. I think the Prime Minister should take note of that. And I can't speak on behalf of IAGS, but I can speak on behalf of myself. I think that meetings should take place and pressure should be exerted on the Israeli government to cease genocidal violence in Gaza. And so very much take a meeting and raise the issue and try and use the political clout one has.
And finally, because you can understand why the Israeli government can claim that you've believed Hamas lies, because it is so difficult to get observers and journalists into Gaza itself. Where do you get your evidence from? Where does your organisation go for facts?
Yeah, so we haven't collected any new data or written any new reports. We're just evaluating reports that are already out there and really trying to look for those reports which have adhered to the best academic standards. And there is now a larger body of work trying to work with the uncertainty of the data that is there. And that's what academics are really trained to do, to develop methods to try and understand the world despite not having all the best data, and then to quantify that and to say, okay, well, we know that we do know this and we don't know that, but what does that mean? And there's plenty of journal publications in academic journals now, and prominent academics who have done very credible research that substantiate these numbers.
And I mean, the headline that the BBC went with is fairly unequivocal. Israel committing genocide in Gaza, world's leading experts say. You're probably too modest to comment on this, but is it fair to describe your organisation as the world's leading experts on genocide scholarship?
I think many of the world's leading experts are members in our association. We are the largest Genocide Scholars Association, and a lot of the research done on genocide is done by members of our association.
Thank you. Professor Dr. Tim Williams, many thanks. Professor of Insecurity and Social Order at the University of Bundeswehr, which I'm almost certainly mispronouncing, but which is definitely in Munich. And he's also crucially for a member of the International Association of Genocide Scholars. As we head towards the news bulletin, some breaking news for you from the PA news agency. Angela Rayner will leave the government. It is now being reported. We'll bring you all and any more information on that story as it emerges. The time now is 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Trying to remember the last time we actually had big breaking news on our watch. It was probably Angela Rayner revealing that she had actually underpaid on her stamp duty and therefore referring herself to the independent ethics advisor. But if you are just joining us, Angela Rayner has resigned. That is the known. Aggie Chambray is with me, LBC's political correspondent. What are the known unknowns?
So we know that Angela Rayner will leave the government. That means her post as Housing Secretary and her post as Deputy Prime Minister. We don't know at this moment, although I have just in the last few seconds seen a report that she will also resign as Deputy Leader. We know that the Prime Minister has received the report from Sir Laurie Magnus, who's the independent ethics advisor. We don't know whether the Prime Minister sacked Angela Rayner after receiving that report or whether she did indeed resign. It's often quite difficult to work that out in the moment. But if it is right that she has not only resigned as Housing Secretary and as Deputy Prime Minister, but as also as Deputy Leader, then this is an absolutely massive moment. This is what Downing Street were trying to avoid all week, that deputy leadership contest, as well as losing his incredibly popular Deputy Prime Minister too.
That's crucial, isn't it? And remind us why.
So that is crucial because she won that contest in 2020 to become deputy leader. But this is basically the worst possible time for Keir Starmer to have a deputy leadership contest, because it will mean that senior people within the Labour Party, probably cabinet ministers and possibly some embattled ex-cabinet ministers like potentially Louise Haigh, the former Transport Secretary, who is very, very popular within the party, they will probably run to be deputy leader. And how will they get the vote of the members who are pretty unhappy with the Prime Minister and the direction of the Starmer project? Well, probably could be a bit of a race to the bottom, criticising him, saying they will hold him to account. And that, I think, could really destabilise the project. So not only has he lost his crucial number two, someone who was genuinely feared by the Conservatives, the person who stood in for him at Prime Minister's questions when he wasn't there, the person who has an absolutely ginormous brief sorting out renters' rights, the workers' rights, this huge brief in housing, also his Deputy Prime Minister, and now paving the way, we think, if that report is correct, for him to have to oversee a deputy leadership contest.
Just waiting for the final kind of confirmations, and that will involve an exchange of letters, I think, traditionally, that will also be party to. What do we know about their relationship? Because he has been somewhat less generous with other colleagues who were facing questions. Some of the questions arguably quite similar, most obviously probably Roshanara Ali and the homelessness minister brief clashing with her role as a private landlord. What do we know about the relationship between the two people?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, because people have been saying to me all week, people within government as well as Labour MPs, if Angela Rayner was anybody else, she would have gone on Wednesday morning. She would have gone when she said she had paid the wrong amount of tax by £40,000. She would have gone at that point. And indeed, I don't believe there has been any other situation where there's been a public scandal involving a minister in Sir Keir Starmer's cabinet where they haven't had to go. You mentioned Roshanara Ali, Tulip Siddiq, Louise Haigh, Andrew Gwynn too, just to name a few. Yeah. They've all gone pretty quickly, bar Tulip Siddiq. I think Roshanara Ali went on the same day too, Louise Haigh, same night, Andrew Gwynn, actually before the story even dropped. And this was different. Now, this was different because of those reasons that I've already given about the fact that it's going to make that deputy leadership contest very, very difficult. It is also the fact that she will be a very difficult and dangerous, or could be at least a difficult and dangerous enemy on the backbenches.
Do you think that's likely?
I think it's possible. I think there are parts of the Starmer project that I think she's probably not a massive fan of, and I think if things come up, then I think she will criticise. If you think back to Louise Haigh, she was pretty quiet straight after being sacked, and then the welfare vote came up, and she was one of the people who came out publicly, talked about it in public, and I think that rankled with some ministers, and I think you may have the same situation with Angela Rayner. You may not. She may remain completely loyal from the backbenches, but if she doesn't like the direction, she may, and she was somebody until probably yesterday afternoon who was very much seen as the front runner to take over from Keir Starmer at some stage.
Is that over completely? It's just not a case of sit tight for 2 years and come back?
It could be. And
if Starmer were to ever step down, there's nothing to stop her running again for the leadership. But this, and I mean, supporters of the Labour movement and of Angela Rayner are not actually going to be that spooked by unless there's something extraordinary in this ethics advisor's report. It doesn't necessarily kill off her leadership ambitions, but it certainly sets them back a lot.
I think that's right, and I think you know James, as well as literally anyone, that politics moves so quickly and people forget things very, very quickly. It is completely possible that she will be able to go to the backbenches and return in some form and run to be Labour leader. But there are people that have said to me this week as well, how hungry are you for Labour leader if you buy a flat in Hove, hundreds of miles away from your constituency? Did she ever really want it? Other people say, of course she wanted it. This is what she's been working for her entire political life. But I do remind those people too, in 2020, she did not stand to be Labour leader. Lots of people surprised at the time. And there are people who think actually she just doesn't really want it. So this could set back, I think this will set back her leadership ambitions if indeed they are there. But at this stage, we don't really know exactly how this is going to play out, and we don't know indeed when there'll be the next Labour leadership contest.
Any prospect of Andy Burnham coming back? I mean, he'd have to get a seat in the... Would he have to be in the House of Commons to be deputy leader of the Labour Party?
He would have to be a member of the House of Commons to be deputy leader.
Are you sure?
I'm saying that, so yes. Well, so I'm sure because I had a conversation with somebody this week we had a conversation about whether Andy Burnham might return to the Commons to run to be Labour leader, and I said, would he have to be an MP? And they said, yes, of course. So I think it is the same. I'm pretty willing to say that it is the same. So I think unlikely he would be able to run for deputy leader just on the time frame. But there are live conversations about whether Andy Burnham may return to the Commons.
I mean, we've spent days now not knowing what's happened, but formulating, not so much you, because you're a proper journalist, but formulating pungent opinions on what should happen if such and such has. And we still don't actually know. What we do know is that she's gone from government. We don't know for certain. Or we do. No, we don't know for certain that she's gone as deputy leader of the party, or has that been confirmed? These are two different things. One is elected by the membership, and even though it sounds the same, deputy prime minister is appointed by the prime minister.
Yeah, and Harriet Harman, when she was deputy leader, was never actually deputy prime minister,
yes,
so it can be the case.
Exactly that. And it creates this sort of curious... I guess what I mean by not knowing exactly what has happened. It may be that she has had enough. It may be that this week has taken such a toll on her. Laurie Magnus has found opacity. It's not like a massive guillotine, smoking gun type scenario, but neither is it. She's absolutely in the clear. The only way I could see her surviving today was if the independent ethics advisor had come out and said she is absolutely in the clear. This could have happened to anybody. Anything less than that, I suspect that she would have independently decided to go rather than waited for Keir Starmer to make a decision about what he was going to do in those contexts.
That's interesting. I think lots of people thought the opacity was actually the most likely outcome of his report, and he was going to say she hasn't breached the ministerial code, and I should say at this moment we're still waiting for those letters to drop. She hasn't breached the ministerial code, but she should have taken more care on X, Y, Z, which gave him enough political room on either side to say she can stay or she can go. But as you say, she may well have thought this is enough. And watching her interview with Beth Rigby on Sky News on Wednesday morning, it was obvious that this had taken a huge personal toll on her already, and that was before 3 more days of intense coverage of this.
So who are Keir Starmer's biggest allies now in Cabinet?
Good question. So there's...
I ask them occasionally.
Always. So there's people like Shabana Mahmood, who is the Justice Secretary. She is seen as a big ally. She, I think, is one of the people who may well run to be deputy leader if indeed there is a vacancy. People like Pat McFadden, and of course, I mean, it would be ridiculous to not mention Darren Jones, who is now officially his number 2 in Downing Street. So people like that. There's also the kind of the Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, Peter Kyle, Science Secretary gang there. They were seen as quite close. And of course, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor. Now they have had a reasonably strained relationship, I think it's fair to say, over the struggles with the economy, and he's now bolstered his economic firepower within number 10. But I think he does have allies across the cabinet.
Who'd be a real dark... I mean, could Wes Streeting run for deputy or something like that?
Yes, he could. I mean, I think it's reasonably likely that anyone in cabinet could run to be deputy leader because it would boost their profile. I think that the interesting question, as well as who are his allies in cabinet, who is allies in parliament, interesting because he just still, and we've talked about this before, does not have that power base within MPs, within the backbench Labour MPs in Parliament. And it'll be really interesting to see whether this does lead to a reshuffle, who's elevated, who's not elevated, and what happens to those very, very ambitious backbenchers who were really hoping that they were going to get a job and actually haven't managed to get a job.
I now have the letters, which I will, we'll do it together, shall we? We'll work our way through all three letters. We have the letter from the Independent Advisor on Ministerial Standards to the Prime Minister, the letter from the Prime Minister to Angela Rayner, and the letter in longhand, actually, which is rare, isn't it? It's written to Angela Rayner in longhand. Unless I
think that is rare, actually.
Yeah, that's rather nice, actually. I may need a typed version of that because he's got handwriting like a GP. And Kemi Badenoch has made a statement as well, but we could probably live with waiting for that. Let's find out what the major players have had to say after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
17 minutes after 12, and the crucial element of Sir Laurie Magnus's report is now in front of me. I tell you what, if there were any doubt at all about the importance of this office, the importance of this role, and the absolute necessity of referring a matter like this to an independent advisor on ministerial standards, then Sir Laurie Magnus has just absolutely removed any shred of doubt about the importance of the role, because the ministerial code has been breached, and yet at the same time he writes, and I quote, "I believe Ms. Rayner has acted with integrity and with a dedicated and exemplary commitment to public service. I consider, however, that her unfortunate failure to settle her SDLT liability, that's stamp duty, at the correct level, coupled with the fact that this was established only following intensive public scrutiny, leads me to advise you that, in relation to this matter, she cannot be considered to have met the highest possible standards of proper conduct, as envisaged by the Code. Accordingly, it is with deep regret that I must advise you that in these circumstances I consider the Code to have been breached." So, I mean, amazingly, this brings us back to Scott in Uxbridge, who wrote in on Wednesday to say, surely she has to ask everybody involved if there's any way any of this can come back to bite her on the backside. That is what the highest possible standards of proper conduct involves. So an honest mistake, she has acted with integrity and with a dedicated and exemplary commitment to public service, but you could be forgiven in recent years for forgetting that ministers are supposed to abide by the ministerial code, and that crucial language there is highest possible standards of proper conduct. So no impugning of her integrity, quite the opposite, but actually competence, ultimately, Aggie, that has done for her, not dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and when she was not qualified to do so herself, finding somebody who was.
Indeed, and that's the argument that he said in this pretty comprehensive 3-page letter, fundamentally just ending with the fact that it leads him to the advice that she cannot be considered to have met the highest possible standards of proper conduct as envisaged by the Code. So really clear actually there from him, and that was what we were saying, right? So there were three different outcomes that there could be from this. Number one, that he could say she hasn't breached the Code. This is very, very clear. Number two, not that clear. She hasn't breached the Code, but, and this is option 3. She has been found to have breached the Code. And I think there was only, listening to that Keir Starmer interview yesterday, there was only really one outcome that was going to come out of that, because Keir Starmer said yesterday in that interview, I will act on whatever the report is that is put in front of me. And we've got Angela Rayner's letter too, and I think the key bit of that I'll just read out is, I deeply regret my decision to not seek additional specialist tax advice, given both my position as Housing Secretary and my complex family arrangements. She says she takes full responsibility for this error, would like to take this opportunity to repeat that it was never my intention to do anything other than pay the right amount. She talks about the significant toll the ongoing pressure of the media is taking on her family, and said that she is going to resign from Deputy Prime Minister, Secretary of State for Housing, and also as Deputy Leader. So that is now confirmed. She has gone as Deputy Leader too.
Phone lines are open, 0345 60 60973. I don't know what the question that you would like to answer most is, I mean, how bad is this for Keir Starmer? Springs to mind, 03456060973. We know that a reshuffle is to be undertaken. Rachel Reeves's job is safe. I don't know what else isn't. I mean, he has to appoint a new deputy prime. Well, he doesn't have to, but he will probably appoint a new deputy prime minister. What this does to the government, again, as I've said to you all week, I want you to, if you can, answer this question in a way that is not informed by how you felt about this government or how you felt about British politics this time last week, before we even knew that Angela Rayner had bought a flat in Hove. So if you're, got your Labour scarf on super tight and you say, nothing to see here, can't believe it, Angela will be back, it's a terrible witch hunt, it's not fair, it's not very interesting. And equally, if you pretending that Boris Johnson never ignored the findings of his independent ethics advisor when he told people to form a square around the Pritzker after Priti Patel was found to have breached the ministerial code, then, and you think Angela Rayner's awful, then you're not very interesting either. Who is interesting? People who are capable of forming an honest and objective opinion about how bad this is. I think this is the right outcome. I've said since yesterday that if the code has been broken, and it is, I think, largely because she is housing minister, that she needed to conduct herself to a higher standard on the question of seeking advice. But I stress again, this is the independent advisor on ministerial standards writing. I believe she has acted with integrity and with a dedicated and exemplary commitment to public service. So if you had to put it into a sentence, she should have tried harder to get the advice that she needed. As we said yesterday, she should have checked. A normal person checks, a conscientious person double checked, a deputy prime minister should have triple checked. And if she had done, she'd have received the advice that she finally received on Wednesday, after which, of course, she referred the matter to the independent advisor on ministerial standards. What's interesting about this, and why the Priti Patel story is worth mentioning in passing, it led, of course, I think, to the resignation of the last government's ethics advisor but one, is that it's a subjective analysis of the fact. It's a legal mind that could have gone the other way. So if Keir Starmer had made this decision himself and concluded that the ministerial code hadn't been broken, because you can't expect people to observe standards of proper conduct above and beyond what is reasonable or what is plausible, he'd have a problem of a different order. He would be able to be accused of bias, or to be accused of cronyism, or to be accused of telling Labour MPs to form a square around her, even though she had clearly broken the ministerial code. It's a clean break is about the best thing that he could be saying to himself in the mirror at the moment.
And also, she's been accused this week and towards the end of last week about hypocrisy. I mean, that was one of the charges against her. And indeed, a minister said to me this morning, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword, talking about the fact that she would have to go. If Sir Keir Starmer had not either sacked, or indeed, and he does say that Angela chose to quit, if Angela Rayner had not left government after she was found to have breached the ministerial code, well, wow, he would be accused of absolute hypocrisy, wouldn't he? Because of how much they lambasted the Conservatives when they were in government for Priti Patel, and indeed for other people's behaviour over tax.
Not that it will stop the Conservatives' client journalists from engaging in precisely that level of hypocrisy when they move on from defending the failure to get rid of ministers who broke the code to demanding that this minister who broke the code should hit the road. But you're absolutely right. That point there about live by the sword, die by the sword is, I mean, that's a negative reading of it. The positive reading of it is that they really did promise that things would be different, and therefore they have to be different. It's not good enough just to say it was an honest mistake. You have to say it was an honest mistake, but that's not good enough for us. That is a sackable offence, a resigning matter.
And also, if you're a minister, your entire job is to get advice from officials or from lawyers, and to then make up your own mind about what you should do in terms of politics and look at it through a political lens. And that's kind of what Angela Rayner did with the flat, right? She got 3 pieces of advice and then she made a decision. And I think that framed part of why this was so difficult for her, because, as you say, she just, well, as he says, she didn't take enough care effectively over this.
And they're sort of absorbing more of Sir Laurie Magnus's letter, and it is that thing that we happened upon on Wednesday, the notion of her job being the problem here, the nature of her job. And he focuses on Deputy Prime Minister as opposed to Housing Minister, meaning that the bar has to be set higher. Given the conjunction of the acknowledged complexity of her family circumstances, her position in government, brackets, most importantly as Deputy Prime Minister, close brackets, and the consequences of getting such a calculation wrong, it is deeply regrettable that the specific tax advice was not sought. We're back to Uxbridge. Because the consequences of getting something wrong are so high, you should have been asking everybody at every turn whether there was any chance at all of any of this coming back to bite you on the backside. And it has.
Isn't there a Tony Blair quote from his book where he basically said his advice while you're in opposition is don't go for people in government too much when there's a scandal, because there is always a scandal. When you're in government, there is always a scandal. So when you're in opposition, let some things go, because when you get into government, people will remember that.
Live by the sword, die by the sword. I've forgotten what it's like to be on air with breaking news. So I think you just say, give me a ring and tell me what your reaction to the breaking news is. And I'll take anything you've got. I mean, if you're celebrating, that's fine. If you're crying, that's also fine. But, blow your nose before you ring in, or at least before you come on the show. Angela Rayner has gone. She has gone as Deputy Prime Minister. She has gone as Housing Minister. She has gone as Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. It's rare that you get a politician of her background and popularity. She excites extraordinarily strong emotional reactions in voters and colleagues alike. She is a force of nature in many ways, and she has never been backwards in coming forwards to lambast others for errors avoidable or otherwise, which is why the phrase live by the sword, die by the sword has popped up half a dozen times in the last 5 minutes. So, and there's still a little bit more detail to share on exactly what advice she received and didn't receive. But it's my job to provide you with further detail. It's your job to provide me with immediate reactions. And I suppose digging into that, what does this mean? Is it too early to ask who you think should be the next Deputy Leader of the Labour Party? Of course it's not. 0345 60 973 is the number that you need. How do you react to the news? Who should be the next Deputy Leader? And I don't normally ask this question, but I think when a story is literally unfolding in front of you, you're allowed to. How big a deal is this? It potentially is potentially huge, depending on the answers to the other two questions in many ways, depending on how voters react to it and on who replaces her. Final question for Aggie is, Jeremy Corbyn has set up his own party now. There's nothing to stop his sort of fan base, who are still members of the Labour Party, trying to make trouble for Keir Starmer in the coming deputy leadership election. I'm not suggesting they will, but it is another consequence of this weird split on the left at the moment, that there will be a deputy leadership election that may look a little bit like the leadership election in 2015, potentially. Potentially.
I think a lot of people who are very angry with the Starmer project have actually left the Labour Party. Yes. There's been lots of stories about diminishing numbers within the Labour Party, but you're absolutely right. There's no reason at all. If you are still a member of the Labour Party, you will be able to vote in the upcoming deputy leadership contest, and we don't know exactly who will be running from that, but as I say, expect some people within Cabinet, potentially former Transport Secretary Louise Haigh, and I'm sure there'll be people very much from the left of the party too.
I would qualify that Tony Blair quote, actually, and I'd say unless they've broken the ministerial code. If they've broken the ministerial code, go after them like a rat up the drain pipe, and then you can have a kind of level of inter-party probity. So if a minister breaks the ministerial code, they have to go. We lived through a period recently when they didn't, up to and including an actual prime minister who tried to cling on to their jobs after break. What's the point of the code if you're going to keep your job after breaking it? But anywhere below a breach, an established breach of the ministerial code, maybe the temptation to go in with all guns blazing needs to be resisted a little bit more in case of situations like this. Although it has been broken here, and that is the point at which her position becomes absolutely unsustainable. 12:30 is the time, and Amelia Cox has your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 12 is the time. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need if you want to react to the breaking news that the government is in need of a new deputy. Angela Rayner has resigned from all three of her posts: Deputy Prime Minister, Secretary of State and Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. This is the second paragraph of Sir Keir Starmer's letter accepting her resignation. As you, and it's in longhand. I can't remember the last time I saw a letter from a Prime Minister in longhand, so forgive me if I misread any of it. As you know, we acted in accordance with the strengthened system relating to ministerial conduct that we put in place on coming into government. You were right to refer yourself to the independent advisor on ministerial standards and right to act on his conclusion. Probably a bit early to chalk this up as an improvement upon previous administrations or even a victory for integrity and ethics. But if you have a strict system in place and you make great hay of having a strict system in place, most, I suppose, pertinently, you really make an issue of the fact that you're going to hold your ministers to much higher standards than some of your predecessors, then you have no choice but to do so. Aggie Chambray is still with me. If you are worried about me missing any breaking news, rest assured there is a professional in the building, and anything that is added to this growing and developing story will be brought to you at the very first opportunity. But if you're just joining us, the crucial sentence in Sir Laurie Magnus's letter is about Angela Rayner's failure to observe the very highest standards. It's relevant again to that point I just made about how high you set the bar, and they have chosen to set it as high as it can possibly go, and Angela Rayner has not cleared it. I want your reactions. I want your thoughts. I want your, maybe not necessarily your predictions, except perhaps in the context of who the next deputy leader should be, but I suspect this is the best possible conclusion for all parties, because Angela Rayner, wounded but continuing, would have become perhaps something of a liability. Keir Starmer gets to make a clean break, and, well, I suppose that the newspapers who were silent when Priti Patel failed to resign after breaking the ministerial code will have to find something new to get excited about on Monday. Ryan is in Coventry. Ryan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
So I got two reactions, really. One is shock. I thought they would drag this out, and it's all happened very quickly, which I think is the right thing to do.
Let me just check something with Aggie. Can I tell Ryan why we think this has all happened so quickly?
Yeah, go on.
Apparently Sir Laurie Magnus is going on holiday tomorrow.
Right.
That's breaking news for you. That's a top insider bit of information for you. But anyway, but it was another thing they said when they came in, that these things would be dealt with very, very quickly. What's your second reaction?
So disappointed, really. Whilst I'm not a big fan of this current government, I do like Angela Rayner, and I think she's got integrity, and I think she's an effective politician. So it's a shame that she's going to be removed from the role, but I think it's absolutely the right thing to do, and I think it's got to be integrity at the heart of this government.
As soon as the independent ethics advisor concluded that the highest standards had not been observed, it was, and she would have accepted that. It was all over for her. But I can see why they needed an inquiry, because no one is claiming that she deliberately tried to dodge tax or that she has acted in a sort of dishonest or self-serving way. She just should have done better.
Yeah, and I'm really interested to what she will do next. Has her credibility gone now that she wouldn't be able to go on and do anything else or put a challenge through to steer?
Well, the current shadow foreign secretary broke the ministerial code at least twice. So there are comebacks in other parties, and there are front bench comebacks available in other parties, and I don't think she ever resigned, did she? She hung on after Johnson, and she got fired by Theresa May, although it probably got dressed up as a resignation. It'd be a shame if she is quitting the front line of UK politics forever, I think.
Will she be a threat to Keir Starmer is an interesting question on the backbenches. People are not popular with his leadership. Can she challenge or be ready to challenge that at any point to come back?
How much of that, thank you, Ryan, how much of that, Aggie, will depend upon how she feels about this episode? What we don't know, and what I personally doubt, is that she thinks it could have ended any other way once Laurie Magnus had published his letter. She's not, I don't think, going to feel that she has, as some of his other departures feel, that she has been thrown under a bus.
No way. The way Keir Starmer and cabinet colleagues of hers have behaved this week on media rounds, it has been so clear they were absolutely desperate for her to stay. I mean, it changed slightly in the last 24 hours, but even yesterday, Keir Starmer was being very, very positive about her, even when he said, I will act on whatever the report is that is put in front of me. I honestly think she will just blame herself. She'll probably blame the advice that she was given, but fundamentally,
I'm not sure she'll do that now.
Well, you don't think she'll blame the advice?
I think that was going to be the way out if Magnus had come down differently, but I mean, can you really blame the advice you received when the conclusion is that you should have asked for more advice?
I think personally, when you're sort of lying in bed thinking about what you did wrong, you will probably just be thinking, I wish I'd got different advice, or, you know, that advice told me X. On the face of it, I don't think she will ever be able to go out there and say it was the advice that led me astray anymore. Absolutely not. But I think personally, I wonder whether she will just blame the advice as well as, of course, herself. I don't think she will blame Keir Starmer for this at all.
When do you think we might hear from her beyond the letter? And do you think she'll sit down with anyone, or do you think she'll just sort of observe a period of silence and rehabilitation, recovery, really? This must have been a traumatic few days for her.
Definitely. I think the latter. I think we won't hear from her for a long time, partly as well because she did that big sit-down interview on Wednesday where she was emotional, it was personal. And don't forget as well that her statement that she put out on Wednesday, as well as that interview, you know, she got a court order lifted, she talked very emotionally about her son, and she has said this has been very, very difficult for them. So I'm sure she will just now want to spend time with them, step back from the limelight and just have a bit of time. And as well, I've mentioned it a few times, but if we look back at other examples of people who have left the government, I don't think we have heard from any of them very quickly by any sense. But I've just had an interesting message from somebody within government who says they think that Number 10 will try to find a way to not have a deputy leadership contest at all. They think that maybe the Prime Minister will even think it's best to abolish the post, given it's historically always caused division in the party. Now, that's just someone's opinion within government, but I think that is very interesting considering what we were saying at the beginning of the programme.
I just heard the ghost of Tony Benn chuckling in my ear at that observation about it always being a difficult post and always carrying considerable baggage. That's interesting. I'll wait to the break to ask you who your top secret source is. Thank you, Ryan. Let's have a quick word from John in Croydon, but before that, maybe some of the texts. Lots coming in, as you'd expect. I'm genuinely devastated for Angela Rayner, writes Trina. The right have got what they wanted. The working class woman made good has been forced to leave government. She was given bad advice and is paying the price. So disappointed with Starmer and, I must say, with you. That's me, don't worry, not you, Aggie. And that's a perfectly reasonable position, Trina, but I'm afraid the ministerial code, I mean, crikey, if you think that I'm somebody that you can respect and admire in the context of political coverage, then you will know that I am absolutely committed to the idea that the ministerial code should be as close to sacrosanct as you can get in public life. And if you're found to have breached it, and it has to be an independent advisor on ethics that conducts the investigation, otherwise you leave yourself wide open to accusations of bias. If you're a minister and you break the code, you go. I don't know what it is about that you struggle with, or indeed think that her background is relevant to. Why is she treated in such a vile fashion by so many on the right? Answer, because she's a working class woman. But that's not why she's lost her job. That's not why she's chosen to resign. And it's not why they dug into this story. They dug into this story because she's Deputy Prime Minister. They would have done it if the Deputy Prime Minister was the Baroness Tuffington of Buffington. Aaron says, just like that, I was left politically homeless. I see Wes Streeting in the crosshairs next. Ed Davey is looking good to me at the moment. Nadia's a silly woman. Why didn't she just overpay? If unsure, why not overpay? What could the press say then? It's a point I made on Wednesday, actually, and I'm far from alone in doing so. Eventually, I am sure that the tax office would have given her a refund. Keir must be absolutely furious. What a mess, what a nightmare. I don't know if he is absolutely furious. I think he'll be gutted. I don't think he'll be very angry with her. I think it's an understandable but unforgivable mistake. I hate the way, says Alan, our politics has gone. None of this is about policy or the good of the country. It's all about point scoring and taking out members of the other side. I wonder if there is any way back to civility. I think we're all screwed. Again, Alan, you might be right. in conclusion, but it is a way back to civility. This is a way back to civility. It's the importance of the ministerial code and the independent advisor on ministerial standards. That is literally how you begin the process of rebuilding trust in politics after it was so completely destroyed by Boris Johnson and his mates and his client journalists in the media. You have to make your way back to civility or normality or accountability using the instruments of government, of which the ministerial code and the independent advisor are absolutely intrinsic. John's in Croydon. John, what would you like to say?
Afternoon, James.
Hello.
I can see how the media rounds have gone with the Labour government. They clearly wanted Angela Rayner in, but with that being said, will this offer Keir some security in that if people were unsure about his leadership, the next person that would be globally or universally looked at within the Labour Party as someone who could head up leadership would be Angela Rayner? So now with her being gone, that can potentially dampen down some of the potential manoeuvres that may have looked to happen within Westminster, give him a bit more security in his position within the party. I know they're not so infighting.
I mean, you mean as a rallying point for dissatisfaction, she's no longer there, and the dissatisfaction might stay in place, but the rallying point has gone. I don't know that she ever demonstrated any desire to challenge Keir Starmer at any point in the political cycle, did she?
Not that she did demonstrated that, but she did demonstrated qualities that were worthy potentially of leadership and that radical, not so radical, but the strong personality that potentially Keir is lacking, she seems to have in abundance. And being able to get through to the real concerns of people and talk to them on a level that doesn't seem so constricted, she is a big loss for that. And also being that beacon towards the left, I don't know, I just potentially think that Keir clearly didn't want this, he wasn't asking for this, but could that give him a little bit of the, because look, they're on phase 2.
I mean, it's a bit of a stretch, Joe. Your glass is half full, isn't it, this afternoon?
I'm away later, so
looking for the positives. There aren't any positives. I don't think there are. Hey, if you turn out to be right, you turn out to be right, but there aren't any real positives here for any of them, except that it's over. The boil is lanced, the wound is cauterized, and the damage is complete, but it is also considerable.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:48 is the time. Were I to open up the textbook entitled Lazy and Predictable Radio Presenting 101, then we'd play a bit of appropriate music, wouldn't we? Nothing says lazy and predictable more than playing a little bit of appropriate music to accompany a story. And on this occasion, I would actually quite like to. I think Angie by the Rolling Stones might actually be quite a poignant way to end the programme. But no, there's no point having rules if you don't stick to them. And speaking of rules, a quick word on footballification before we hear from Dave and Geraldine. What you're going to find now, so I sit here as someone who rates Angela Rayner, thinks that there is absolutely no prospect of a better option in terms of government and the current Labour movement popping up anytime soon in this country, and very, very mindful of the damage that's been done by 14 years of client journalists and utterly corrupt and incompetent right-wing politicians. But it's right that she's gone. So, that's the opposite of footballification. No, she's mine. She's on my team. I will protect her. Furious. I said yesterday, I think, that she was going to have to go. What I want you to look out for over the weekend is people who had absolutely nothing to say about politicians like Priti Patel breaking the ministerial code and not going, claiming that this is some sort of disaster or humiliation for the Labour government. So I just want you to notice and possibly deliver me a list on Monday. I want you to make me a list of people who had absolutely nothing to say about a minister breaking the code and being protected by a Prime Minister or clinging on to their jobs by their fingernails, who is somehow also persuaded that a minister resigning after being found to have breached the code by the independent ethics advisor is somehow a bigger deal or a worse story, or, and this is actually jackpot territory, somebody who can now claim that they're all as bad as each other because one side has abided by the rules that they set themselves and one side rode roughshod all over them and didn't hold themselves to account or were not held to account by their own Prime Minister. 12:51, Aggie Chambray is still with me. Is there a lot of unhappiness on the benches, the Labour benches, with Keir Starmer at the moment?
Yes.
So, I mean, this does potentially really add to his burdens. And it is presumably mostly surrounding things like the winter fuel debacle and some of the other relatively avoidable missteps.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think there's been kind of growing unease on the Labour benches because, well, yeah, you're right, starting with winter fuel and then the handling of welfare, then the U-turn on winter fuel. And part of it was, and a lot of it actually, I think, is Labour MPs going back to their constituencies and having really, really difficult conversations with their constituents and having to front up decisions that the government has made only for the government to then go back on those decisions. For winter fuel and welfare, those are both examples of that. So I think there is growing unease. What I think has helped the government so far is the fact that there's been this looming reshuffle. So there are lots of Labour MPs who are holding out for jobs, and there hasn't been amazing expectation management on who's actually going to get jobs. So, and this could come today, but we understand there is now a reshuffle underway. Obviously, Angela Rayner's gone, but those lower ministerial ranks as well. When people are overlooked for jobs, I think that could add to the general unease.
And we've talked about loyalists. We've talked about his allies. None of them really household names, except Rachel Reeves, maybe. What will Wes Streeting be doing at the moment? What will he be thinking?
Wes Streeting, I don't know. He banned energy drinks this week for under 16s, so maybe he is thinking about that. I mean, if it's right that there is a big reshuffle underway, I'm sure every single minister will be checking their phones every 2 minutes and trying to work out whether they are going to be sacked or leave their department.
So Starmer 2.0 is what we're looking at. Starmer government 2.0.
Delivery.
Yeah, possibly. Just little things from the past that even I'd managed to forget. When Owen Paterson was found to have breached the code for ordinary parliamentarians as opposed to ministers, Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg tried to abolish the entire code, of course. So again, that job that I've tasked you with for the weekend of looking out for people who are trying to conflate following the code, obeying the rules, behaving correctly with people who for years didn't, it might be rather more fun than even I realised. Let's go to Shepherd's Bush. Dave is there. Dave, what's going on? What do you think? What are you feeling?
Feeling sad. The right thing, yes, she should have gone. I hope she hadn't. I wish she hadn't. I wish Keir had stood by her. What upsets me mostly is that you've got one side who plays by the rules as usual and another side that doesn't. Yeah. I mean, you just named some of the people there, Mogg, Johnson, Patel. We've got MPs who beat their girlfriends up. It doesn't apply to them. Patterson.
Ex-girlfriend.
Ex-girlfriends, yeah. But quite happy to be. Because look, nothing. Don't worry, old chap. It doesn't apply here. But what alarms me most, and hopefully one day we might be aware, the Democratic Party in America are waking up to it now. Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go high. Sadly, with the state of politics in the world today, you have to go down to their level and hold the mirror to them. That's what the Democratic Party is waking up to in America. You hold the mirror up to them. I'm thinking of Gavin Newsom.
I was about to say, is Gavin Newsom you're talking about. So for people who don't know, he's sort of simultaneously taking the mickey and taking a leaf out of Donald Trump's playbook, isn't he? And it's working so far, but it's a risky business, you know, not to take the high road. The problem is that with Farage on the march and his obvious contempt for the kind of standards that are being observed here at the moment, because he's such a big fan of Donald Trump, who blows them up on a regular basis, it feels like a lonely time for politicians who try to do the right thing.
It does. I hope just quickly that Darren Jones is the Deputy Prime Minister. But with the likes of Farage, oh boy, it doesn't apply to us. The ministerial code. If this was Jacob Rees-Mogg, nothing would be said. What about when, what was the last Chancellor who forgot to...
Jeremy Hunt.
12 flats.
It was an honest mistake.
Oh, of course it is. An honest mistake, 12 flats. And I think this is...
But I don't think, to be fair...
It's an honest mistake.
Yeah, but I don't think he was found to have broken the ministerial code.
But again, when it's the ministerial
that's got to be the kicker. That's got to be the only thing that matters. And even if some of these people that we're both somewhat reluctantly remembering, even if they are not changed and they still think that these things shouldn't apply to them, or they would still want to form a square around the Pritzker or try and destroy the code rather than actually watch a crony get into trouble for breaching it, you can never step... And sure, hold mirrors up to the people doing wrong, but you could never go to the place where you say, well, if they don't abide by the ministerial code, if they don't care about independent advisors on ethics and standards, then why should we? Because once you go there, everything's lost.
Again, it's difficult to defend that position, but I think that's what you need to do. I think if he had stood by her, because I think this is a genuine mistake. I don't think she's trying to be underhand.
But the independent advisor, no, she isn't. That's what they found. No one is accusing her of trying to be underhand. She has absolutely been exonerated of any deliberate wrongdoing, but the code is breached because it demands that you observe the highest possible standards, and that means making sure you're not making mistakes. And you can't go there, Dave. You can't say, look, the other lot are rotters and thieves and charlatans and liars, so why don't we do a bit more lying? Because it works.
So how about she made a genuine mistake, and me, as party leader, I'm going to stand by her, because in life, in our working lives and in our daily lives, people make mistakes. We get things wrong. And to stand by her, I think would have been maybe even a harder thing to do, but I think it would have been a stronger and a right thing to do. That we all make mistakes, James, and whatever job we do in daily life, we get things wrong. Some probably more than others, and some are bigger mistakes than others. But I think if he had stood by her, I know it would have been a stick to beat him with.
That might not have been an option. She might have wanted to go. I think that's possible. But I'd agree with you if it weren't for the ministerial code. I just think that has to be now the gold standard. It shouldn't even be a gold standard. It should be the standard.
It should be normal. It should be a normal standard.
It really
James,
should.
Are we going to finish on a Friday disagreeing with each other?
Disagreeing gently. And what are you having for tea tonight?
Humble pie.
I've never heard of it. Thank you, Dave. Last word of the week, I think, to Geraldine, who's in Putney. Geraldine, what would you like to say?
Yes, I do. I feel very sorry for her, and I have met her. I'm actually got a membership with the Labour Party.
Oh, yes.
And also, I used to work for solicitors years ago, and conveyancing is a very complex subject to deal with, because if you have a trust fund, it means that the other property isn't really in their name, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, with the greatest of love and respect, I've had this phone in 30 times this week, and it's over now. She's gone, and she broke the ministerial code.
I think it's very sad, and I think he's lost a genuine person.
I think you're right. But remember, the Shadow Foreign Secretary broke the ministerial code twice and didn't even lose her job the first time. So the route back to the front bench, albeit that they probably shouldn't be quite as well greased as that particular route, are certainly... they certainly exist. Geraldine, thank you. Aggie Chambray, thank you. I suspect you might want to hang around because I have a slight antennae twitch that Sheila Fogarty might be returning to this territory imminently. But if you missed any of this show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the top stories and opinions. You can put your news categories in the order you want. You can pause and rewind live radio, and you can listen to a range of podcasts. Who's on my podcast this week? I normally play... Is it Friday today?
It is Friday.
All day?
All day. I've been asking that question every day since Monday.
Is it Friday? Yeah. So does anyone know who's on my podcast this week? Have we not done any promo? No? Okay. I think it might be Alexander Armstrong. Or is it Natalie Haynes? It's Natalie Haynes. Anyway, it's brilliant. So listen to it. Download the official LBC app for free.
Just replay the Angela Rayner one.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, but I thought it would be a little bit inappropriate to plug my own work. So it's a really good listen.
It is. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. If you want to know a little bit about the woman behind the politician, then do have a little listen to that this weekend as well. My full disclosure interview with Angela Rayner. Tom Sorbitt will be with you at 4, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.